You win some and you don't win some. That is the theme, or at least that is the opening for tonight. You win some, you don't win others. Unfortunately, I open with the bombshell that I'm sure most of you know, and that is that I was not successful in the Tasmanian Senate. That news was announced by the AEC only about an hour and a half, 2 hours ago. It was, in fact, Tammy Tyrell for the Jackie Lambie Network who secured the 6th Senate spot in Tasmania. So I want to open by saying a massive, massive thank you to the incredible people that supported my campaign in Tasmania. You guys were amazing. And more than just the campaign to try and get me elected, there was a lot more that you guys achieved. Number one, we actually tripled the Liberal Democrats' vote in Tasmania compared to the previous federal election. And compared to their best federal election, to be quite honest. So we tripled that. Let's put that feather in our cap. We achieved that. We also managed to more than sextuple the database in New Zealand. Oh, goodness, I'm tired, by the way. I'm probably going to say a lot of dumb stuff. And I'm just noticing, I don't think this has gone live on Facebook. I think that this has gone live on YouTube only. I'm just noticing not a single comment. Oh, there's comments from Facebook. Okay, prove me wrong right when I say it. Okay, there we go. So we are on Facebook. So Jackie Lambie Network, Tammy Tyrell, look, congratulations where it's due. Well done. They've got the campaign behind them. They've got the people behind them. They've got the voters behind them. And they won that 6th spot. But I want to say a huge, huge thank you to everyone that supported me. You guys were amazing. You made that 3 weeks that I spent in Tasmania and the time before that and the time after that, you've made that just a really encouraging time for me to know that actually what I'm doing matters to enough people that you guys are just coming out of the woodwork and supporting me and helping me in the campaign. To be honest, we always knew that it was unlikely for me to get a seat. Of course, that's what we wanted. That's what we worked for. That's why we were there. That's why we did what we did. But ultimately, the odds were stacked against us for so many different reasons. Number one, I threw my hat in the ring at very, very short notice. It's never been my ambition to be in politics. I don't want to be a politician. As I always say to people, I want to do something useful with my life, and that rules out politics. People think I'm being silly, but actually, if you think about it, politics, the best you can hope as a politician, as someone like myself who believes in small government and individual freedom and responsibility, the best you can really do is kind of a defensive battle, trying to reduce the amount of harm that the government does. You don't really get to do anything particularly amazing. And I put my hand up. I was willing to do it. I'm convinced by the Liberal Democratic Party, and I still 100% believe in the party. They ran their biggest campaign ever. They had more candidates than they've ever had before. I got to see behind the scenes just how hard some of their people were working, and it was phenomenal. Did the campaign run perfectly? No. I dropped the ball. Other people dropped the ball from time to time. But man, what these guys achieved, what the party achieved this time around was phenomenal. But let's be honest, there is a lesson here. We didn't see a meaningful increase in the vote for any of the parties that we would describe as freedom friendly. One Nation are claiming an increase. They're saying their vote went up by 1 point something percent. Well, actually, in the vast majority of seats, their vote went down. It's just that they went into more seats. So therefore, there were more people who could vote for them. So unfortunately, as much as I'd love to say, yes, we saw an increase in votes for them, we really didn't. United Australia Party didn't really get a lot of traction. Even us, I mean, we the Liberal Democratic Party, we increased our vote pretty much across the board, but we started with such a small percentage of the vote to begin with that it's really not a massively significant number of people. It doesn't represent some huge shift in the zeitgeist. And after what we've seen over the last 2 years, you would hope to see a pretty significant shift. You would have hoped to see a lot of Australians, a lot of Tasmanians willing to put aside the two-party duopoly and actually vote for someone that believes in smaller government, less intrusion in our lives, etc. And we didn't see that happen. We have to be realistic about that. We can't lie to ourselves and, oh, no, but this and that. Well, no, hang on. The proposition was on the table very clearly. We did everything we could to get the word out, and they didn't vote for it. Now, there's one of probably 2, maybe 3 things that are wrong there. Either our messaging is wrong, and it's not appealing to people in the way that it should, or our messaging is correct and people actually just don't want it or don't understand it. Which of those you think is correct? I don't know. I don't know. But what I do know is that what we've just voted for, we collectively have voted for, is a continuation of more of the same. And if that concerns you, then you're in the right place, because I'm going to be talking about what to do in a world where we're going to see a continuation of the norm. Because it's we've gone back to business as usual. I was plodding along on a certain sort of set of messages and a set of warnings, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. And then I diverted to run for the election, and now the election's done, and I didn't get in, and it's sort of back to business as usual. Let me get back to what I've kind of been saying and what I've been warning about. But I think the events, not just the election, but the events that's happening right now with the power grid instability, not that I've actually experienced it here in Melbourne yet. I haven't had any blackouts here in Melbourne. I don't know if anyone else has had them. But certainly the grid has been supposedly, according to media reports, according to the Australian Energy Market Operator, has been pretty volatile and fragile recently. We're seeing inflation. We're seeing the effect of that. Some things are very transient inflation. I mean, we have massively expensive lettuces because of huge amounts of rain in southeast Queensland. That's not a lasting thing. That's not representative of across-the-board inflation. But then again, we do have things that are representative of across-the-board inflation. And we can look at those and go, you know what? Inflation has definitely gone up a step. Economic uncertainty has definitely gone up a step. I'm going to play you a bit of a bombshell video as part of tonight's Slow Chat. That I can't claim credit for. It was from someone else's YouTube channel, and I'll credit them when I play the video. But pretty interesting stuff and concerning stuff. Now, it's concerning, but I don't want to actually be, I don't want to be selling a sense of hopelessness, because I'm not actually hopeless at all. Even despite the results of the election, despite all of that, I'm actually very optimistic. I'm optimistic at heart, but I'm actually still very optimistic for the future. However, we also have to be realistic. We have to look at the world with a clear set of eyes and go, okay, this is what's happening in the world. How do I respond? How do I respond? Okay, so there's been a huge amount of comments. Thank you, guys. I really do appreciate all the comments. Time to leave Sictoria. Yeah, well, that's going to happen for me later on this year. I'm grateful for these slow chats. Thank you. And Mitty, I do appreciate that. Hi, Megan. And it was a shame that we never actually crossed paths in Tassie, but I do appreciate your support. You've certainly been a supporter during the campaign. Did Steve Keen get in? Steve Mav was the candidate for One Nation in Tasmania. He didn't get in. I don't know who Steve Keen is. The fight continues. It certainly does. Thank you, Adam. I appreciate that. You've achieved a lot, mate. That needs to be acknowledged. Yeah, I'm sorry. Have faith. I would have loved to have given you a much better result, but it is what it is. And I do appreciate the support that I did get. It still means a lot to me at a personal level, that I had the support that I had, even though it wasn't enough to get me over the line. Thank you, Sandy. That's very kind. All right. Yes, it is on Facebook. It came through right when I thought it wasn't on Facebook, because I hadn't seen any comments. All right, lots of people saying well done. Look, I thank you. I appreciate the support. I really do. Yeah, disappointed to see so many people from the human rights abusing parties being elected. Yeah, it definitely is. After the last 2 years, the fact that so many people have just rubber stamped all of their actions, just said, yes, carry on. That's a worry. That is a worry. Okay, so I'm just going to scroll through to the bottom of the comments. I'm sorry for everyone that I'm skipping over. There's a huge number of comments. Fred is saying, I'm torn. I don't know whether to flee or fight for freedom in Australia. This is one of the big questions now. And those of you that have watched regularly, and there's a lot of people watching now, I'm sure some of you are watching for the very first time. You kind of like, who is this guy? I've talked about whether you stay in Australia or whether you don't. And I think there's a pretty compelling argument for those that can diversify their life offshore and spread their risk across multiple political jurisdictions. I think there's a pretty good I think there's a pretty good argument to say, at the very least, go and get that other passport. At the very least, go and get residency in that other country, even if you're not necessarily going to leave right now. Go and get the paperwork in place. That's not an option for everybody. And even for those where it is an option, it's not necessarily desirable. It's, you've got to make that decision for yourself. Are you going to stay and fight? And ultimately, are you willing to go down with the ship? Or is there a point where you head for the lifeboats? And if there is, what is that for you? What's that signal to tell you to head for the lifeboats? John Roberts is on the money here. Get out of the capital cities and go to regional areas if you can. I'm going to do, here's tonight's agenda. I'm going to do a bit of an election debrief. I'm then going to go back to my very first slow chat, April the 8th, 2021. You can go back and watch it yourself. It's still on Facebook. It was a Facebook only. I wasn't doing the whole YouTube thing back then. So go to Facebook, April the 8th, 2021. You will see it for yourself. And I say very clearly, I am here to talk about two things that I think are going to dominate our lives for the next 10, 15, or 20 years. And they are a coming economic crisis and a coming grand solar minimum. I said that 14 months ago. I've been saying both of those things before then as well. But the easy one that I can point you to where I say both of them is 14 months ago, 8th of April, 2021. On my Facebook page, under my videos tab, you can find it there yourself. And in the 14 months since, I think I've only been shown to be correct, unfortunately. I wish that wasn't the case. So we're going to talk a lot more about the economic situation. I've got some videos to show. I've got a video to show you and some data to discuss with you around that. And then talk about the grand solar minimum, because that is the dark horse in all of this. That is the thing that most people are completely unaware of and are going to be blindsided by. Okay. Oh, hang on. This is a slow chat. Of course. For those of you who it's your first slow chat, don't bother complaining about the cigar. It has absolutely no effect on me whatsoever, except perhaps to poke some fun at you and feed the algorithm by getting you angry. Today, I am having a Cohiba. It is a Cohiba, Connecticut. Now, the thing to remember with the Cohiba brand, it's a very famous Cuban brand, but this is not Cuban. A lot of these famous Cuban brands actually have non-Cuban arms, and that is because in the American market, Cubans are banned. They cannot import them to the US, and that's the biggest market for cigars in the world. So they started non-Cuban subsidiaries, basically, so as to be able to sell their brands into the US. This is an example of one such thing. The wrapper comes from Ecuador. It is a Connecticut shade wrapper from Ecuador. I don't recall off the top of my head where the binder and where the filler comes from, but I do recall that it's a very, very nice stick. So I'm going to be enjoying this. I don't have any whiskey. It's a sad day in the Field household. I've run out of whiskey. I do, however, have some wine from the hills around Adelaide, which I will be enjoying with this stick while we have a chat. Now, tonight, my agenda is long, and it's going to take some time to work through it all. But I also want to make time tonight for your comments and for discussion backwards and forwards. Now, the comments always come in way faster than I can keep up with. I can't, probably 49 out of every 50 comments just end up passing me by. I just can't keep up. But I would like to have a bit of a chat, and I will try and focus on comments where and when I can. And that way we can have a little bit of a chat tonight, because we're looking at some interesting times ahead. And I think we're going to need each other, and we're going to need community more than ever before. And I'm going to get that to the end. What do you do? I'm going to get practical at the end. This isn't doom and gloom. I want to be really realistic and clear-eyed about where we're at. And that's ugly, unfortunately. But don't despair, because I am going to talk about what we can do. Control the things that you can control to minimize the risks from the things that you can't control. That's where we're going to finish tonight. Dan, I appreciate that. I love my motorcycle too, although it sadly sits there unused and unloved because of financial constraints. Really, I just can't justify registering it at the moment because it's like $700 a year. Okay, Tim is surprised I started with. I'm sorry, Tim. That's I don't love you as much as you love me. I'm sorry to have to break that to you, guys. It's okay. Tim is a regular on the page. I'm a big fan of his comments actually, and we give each other a hard time. Okay, good afternoon. Yeah, look, I'll talk briefly about this in the debrief. I might as well sort of start with this. So, John, firstly, thank you for handing out how to vote cards for us. I really appreciate that. Your observation is absolutely 100% spot on correct. The biggest problem we have is the name. However, the good news is the name is being changed, and I'm actually on the committee that is overseeing that process. We're consulting with members, we're doing some external consultancy, and we're doing some surveys of the public, etc., people who are not political at all, to try and get really good inputs into what the new name should be. So we are working on that. We're aware of the problem. We're working on that, and I'm supporting the party, even though I'm not going to run again. I'm supporting the party. I'm still a big believer in the Liberal Democratic Party and whatever they become, whatever their name becomes. But we are definitely changing that because we need to. It's just the name was a problem. The name was a liability. Okay, so the election. Let me just say, probably my number one thing from the election was how exciting it is to be involved in politics or on the fringes of politics, as it were, as a political commentator, at a time when more people than ever before are getting passionate about politics. As much as this election did not see the result that we wanted, let's just take a little bit of a step back. More people than ever before, and so many first timers were involved this time. They were passionate this time. Now, the nature of that amount of growth, I mean, look at the Liberal Democratic Party. I love the Liberal Democratic Party. I'm a huge fan. I'm in their corner, but I'm going to be honest with you. They weren't properly equipped for the amount of growth that they had, the amount of volunteers that they had, the amount of candidates that they had. There's a certain organizational machine that's needed behind that. And the people in the party worked their asses off, but there just weren't enough hours in the day. There weren't enough people to actually do the job. And so, unfortunately, not as much as what could have been done got done in the end. And I do not say that to lay blame. I'm just making the observation. We had this amazing growth, but that comes with growing pains as well. So if you've been someone who was supporting the party and you're like, oh, yeah, okay, I like the party, but I'm not really happy with the way the campaign went or whatever, please be patient with the party, okay? These guys worked their asses off. They were dealing with a really, really intense situation for them internally with an enormous workload. And they really genuinely did do their best. And in my opinion, they really genuinely did do a fantastic job, if an imperfect job. But I certainly would not have done any better under those circumstances. In fact, I would almost certainly have done a lot worse had I been the person in that administrative type role, coordinating stuff, organizing stuff. They did a fabulous job. So there's growing pains that have happened, but there's also a lot of learnings. And please rest assured, there's a lot of internal discussion happening now about how do we organize ourselves so that in future this doesn't happen again? How do we bring on more resources? How do we get resources into where it's going to make the biggest difference for the next campaign, which of course is the November election here in Victoria. So lessons are being learned, changes are being made, the name is being changed. I'm really excited about the future of the party. But yes, it was an imperfect campaign. It was. That's just the truth. But sort of for a good reason, if that makes sense, for a positive reason, and that is just the sheer number of people, the number of volunteers, the number of candidates, etc. So I think that's really exciting, and it's really exciting to have been a political commentator for 12 years and be scratching my head and wondering, why in the hell aren't Australians excited about politics? Why aren't they interested? Why aren't they paying attention? And to finally, after 12 years, see not enough yet, but more Australians than ever before starting to pay attention. So this is actually an exciting time. And as much as this election did not go the way that I wanted it to go, that I hoped it would go, that a part of me expected it to go, not in terms of me getting in necessarily, but I honestly, I thought we'd get David Limbrick in. I mean, come on, surely, but we didn't. So even despite that disappointment, I still think that there's been some positives. We're seeing more people than ever before engaged in politics. We're seeing the Liberal Democratic Party and whatever they become, whatever they rebrand as, becoming more professional, more organized, adapting to the size that they now have and the profile that they now have. And I think the campaign they're going to run in Victoria is going to be amazing. I think it's going to be really, really, really amazing. And I'm going to be in their corner supporting them using Battleground Melbourne to do that, as I've talked about in previous slow chats. For the guys in Tassie, the guys and girls in Tassie, you guys were amazing. And I want to mention, I had a family from Victoria actually bring their bus. They own a bus that's a camper bus sort of thing with a bunch of beds in it and a shower and everything else. And they brought that, alongside me on the Spirit of Tassie over to Tassie. They stickered it all up with my signage, and we drove around Tassie with that bus and with a couple of cars with magnets on them. And raising awareness, stuffing letterboxes. There was an incredible family from Human down in the south of Tasmania who made a newspaper called the Aussie Battler, fantastic newspaper. And they delivered it to, I don't think I'm telling a lie. I think I'm accurate when I say they delivered over 140,000 of them. I can't remember the exact number, but that's the number that comes to mind. And in the process, they also helped to distribute a huge number of my leaflets into letterboxes and so forth. So, and then there were people, there was someone riding a horse just through their part of town, handing out leaflets. There were people doing all kinds of things to try and draw attention. And I was traveling around, obviously speaking every opportunity I had, attending rallies or attending other sort of events. And between myself and the team that came with me, and then the amazing group of Tasmanians that got around me, and then the other candidates as well, the lower house candidates and my fellow Senate candidate, Chris Croft, there was so many people working so hard to try and make this happen. And I'm so grateful regardless of the outcome. I'm so grateful to each and every one of you who helped and the people that also funded that campaign. I mean, I could not have brought that bus over. I couldn't have paid for that. I couldn't have paid for the signage. I couldn't have paid for the printing of hundreds of thousands of leaflets that went out into letterboxes. None of that was possible without you guys. And I'm just so grateful. So thank you. Not the result we wanted, but you know what? We have to accept it. And there are positives in there. And I think we just have to take that same long-term view that I've been talking about the whole way through. The long-term view that this is a war. This is not a single battle. This is a war. So I just want to say, Aidan, they're paying for preferences. I really hope you have proof of that, because otherwise that is slander. And no, they're not paying for preferences. And in fact, you can't get party preferences anymore. It doesn't happen. It works through the individual putting their number on the ballot. So you might need to update yourself and double check your data. Okay. So, all right. That's the campaign. That's the election. I didn't get in. Tammy Tyrell did. Congratulations to her. Congratulations to Jackie Lambie. It is unfortunate, I think. Okay. So John Marichich, and thank you, John. I've been seeing your emails and stuff, and I haven't got to them yet. I'm sorry. Where did it all go wrong? I can't believe freedom parties and other independents didn't make a difference. What's your take on it? My take on it is apathy. It's the same problem that has infected Australian politics for the last 12 years of me being a political commentator. And as much as we have more people who are active and aware than ever before, the fact is not enough. Not enough. And here's the reality. This is what I've been saying for a very long time. People only pay attention to politics when it hurts them. And for some people, COVID didn't feel like it hurt them. They kept getting their government benefits, or they kept getting their laptop working job from home. Some people didn't care about being forced to take a vaccine. Didn't bother them. They were happy to go ahead and do it. So some people don't feel like they were hurt at all by COVID. Some people feel like they were hurt. Maybe they didn't want to take the vaccine, but they did it, and then they got on with their lives. And the psychology kicks in, and now they're resentful of the people that didn't do it. And there's sort of a lot of layers there. There's only 5-10% of the population that actually got hurt and feel hurt by all of what happened with COVID. Of course, everyone has been hurt, and we're going to be living with the consequences of that for 10, 15, 20 years, economically and health-wise and all sorts of areas. But they're not aware of it yet. They don't feel like they've been hurt. And so therefore, they're not politically engaged yet. This is just going to take time. There is also, and here's the dangerous thing. Australia may not actually wake up in time or at all. When I was in Venezuela in 2014, a majority of people were in love with the socialist government. The hospitals didn't have bandages, didn't have painkillers. Forget a functional education system. You couldn't get a job. Forget starting a business. They were impoverished. They were dumpster diving for food, but they still loved their socialist government because they believed the propaganda that said it would be even worse without them. There's nothing magical about us that protects us from that same stupid fate. Nothing at all. Now, like I said, this isn't a doom and gloom session, but we have to be really brutal. We have to debrief honestly with ourselves. There is nothing magical about us that stops us from becoming Argentina, on the way to becoming Venezuela, on the way to becoming who knows what, Zimbabwe. There is nothing at all that protects us, inherent, that protects us from that fate. The only thing that protects us from that fate is the decisions that we make. And I would have to say the decisions made by ScoMo and the Liberals were appalling and were taking us directly down that road to Venezuela. I've been saying since 2014, the road to Venezuela is paved with good intentions. All these politicians talking about the good intentions of their policies. The effect is what matters, not the good intentions. So I love trolls. Thank you for coming, Michael. I do appreciate that. I see you've put in like 20 comments already. So please stick around. Please keep doing that. And yeah, I'm going to double down. Absolutely. I've been saying it since 2014. You're laughing at me now. I tell you what, people were really laughing at me in 2014. Some of the people that were laughing at me in 2014 ain't laughing anymore because they're looking at what's happening. You're laughing. Give it another 5 years. We'll see if you're still laughing. But in the meantime, please stick around. Please comment. I really do appreciate it. Okay, so I've debriefed the election. On April the 8th, 2021, I did what I believe was my first sort of formal slow chat. I'd done some other sort of stuff before, but I went, you know what? I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call it a slow chat. I'm going to do a thing. And I talked specifically about the two things that I saw coming down the pipeline that are going to dominate the next 10, 15, 20 years of our lives. And I said it was going to be economic collapse, not necessarily collapse in the sense of it becomes a post-apocalyptic world. People think the wrong thing when you say collapse. One of the shocking things about Venezuela was how incredibly normal it looked. You'd walk down the street and there's shops, there's cars, there's apartment buildings, there's office buildings, there's public transport, all the things that you would expect to see. But behind the closed doors of the houses, there's malnourished kids. If you hang around on street corners long enough, you start to notice people with suits and shirts and ties dumpster diving for food on their way home from their public transport to their family. Because their job, these are the ones with jobs, their job doesn't pay them enough. I was there for a wedding, my wife and I. The family that were having the wedding, their son was getting married. They had to start preparing 6 months in advance. And I don't mean preparing as in booking a venue. I mean preparing as in buying flour for the cake. I mean that kind of preparing. I mean negotiating with people and bribing people to get enough eggs and enough butter and everything else at the last minute so they could make everything. That kind of preparing, right? But you walk down the street and it feels shockingly normal until you start to notice the abnormalities. The line of people waiting to get into a grocery store, a supermarket, that goes for 4 city blocks. And most of them aren't going to get in. And most of them, even the ones that do get in, they're not going to get what they actually want. And it feels shockingly normal. And when people talk about economic collapse, there's this way in which in our heads, we envisage something out of a movie, which feels very detached, very unreal, like it couldn't happen here. But actually, it's incredibly normal. Drive through the CBD of Melbourne right now and consider the vacancy rates for commercial office space, 90% plus. And ask yourself 2 years ago whether that seemed feasible, 2.5 years ago now, whether that seemed in any way feasible. And it was unthinkable. It was the inverse. It was 90% occupancy rates 2.5 years ago. What's different? You look around, the same buildings are there. The signs have changed. Some signs are missing. There's a lot more for lease signs there, but the buildings are still there. There is this, you could fool yourself into believing that it's still normal, that life has kind of gone on. And that's exactly what people did all the way through COVID, right? They're driving down the same streets. The same houses are there. The same shops are there. Okay, so that cafe's now gone bankrupt and it's that shop's for lease and a few things have changed, but things change, right? All the time, things are changing. And they could fool themselves into believing, you know what, this is all normal. This is all fine because the suffering was behind closed doors, right? The suffering was behind closed doors. That was the case with COVID in Australia, in Melbourne. And it's the case with socialism in Venezuela. The vast majority of the suffering is behind closed doors and the same psychology kicks in. And that's how you end up with people after 40 years of socialism. Their kids are malnourished. They're lining up in the city square, and I saw this with my own eyes. They're lining up in the city square of Caracas City to get a free T-shirt, and they'll line up for however long it takes to get that free T-shirt because they can't afford to buy one. They'll get a free T-shirt that says Maduro on the front to advertise the government and how much they love the government. And half or more of the population of Venezuela still loves Maduro, loves socialism, right? That's the reality that we're potentially facing. Now, I'm going to do everything I can to avoid that reality. But that means actually getting people to understand the implications of where we're at, to understand the seriousness of the moment in history. So people like Sam Piggio, I can understand your point of view. I can. You seem detached from reality. This couldn't possibly happen here. What are you even talking about? That only happens in third world countries like Venezuela. Well, Sam, you may not be aware, Venezuela was in the top 10 wealthiest countries in the world in the 1940s. They have the largest proven reserves of oil of any country. You talk about a resource-rich nation. Australia is a resource-rich nation. Venezuela is even more so. They have a tropical growing climate. They should have a vibrant tourism industry. They have gemstones out the wazoo, salt mines, all the rest of it. It's all there. They were in the top 10 wealthiest countries on Earth. And in less than 40 years, they went down into the bottom 10. And it's not because something went horribly wrong for them in terms of natural disaster or something, a massive war or anything like that. It's because of government policy. They accepted a socialist government who introduced socialist policies, and they are now reaping the consequences of those decisions. The problem with it is it's incredibly boring. It doesn't look spectacular like it doesn't look like a Hollywood movie with some country falling into disarray and disrepair and etc. Like it actually looks incredibly normal. This is what I'm talking about. It looks and feels incredibly normal, and it happens bit by bit. It happens with you going from having reliable power where you don't really think about blackouts to then having a week's worth of news telling you that the entire eastern seaboard and about 15 million people in Australia's population is at perpetual risk of blackouts for a week. And then that subsides, right? That goes away. This little crisis will go away. But then next year it'll come back and it'll actually happen. And the year after that, there'll be, energy rationing or demand management or various other things. And 40 years later, you're in the situation that Caracas City is in, where the power only comes on for a few hours a day. But you got there gradually and you think it's normal. There are entire generations of kids, young adults getting their first jobs or trying to get their first jobs that have never known anything different. This is literally, like, you are literally exhibiting, Sam, in your comment, you're exhibiting the problem. The problem is we tell ourselves that it can't happen here. So that wasn't quite the tangent that I was going to go on. But what I want to do is I'm going to share with you a video because people like Sam and others, they want to tell me that I'm being overblown. It can't happen here. I'm being ridiculous or detached from reality or various other things. Okay, look, you're entitled to your opinion. You're allowed to be wrong. This is the beauty of a democratic country. You are allowed to be wrong. But I'm going to show you a video showing the CEO of JP Morgan, US financial conglomerate, warning about what he's seeing coming. Now, this was at a closed meeting, this video, and a very small snippet of it leaked online. And then the person who made this video, I will look up and I'll find so I can credit their YouTube channel, managed to get more of the video. And so they kind of talk about the video as well. So you're going to watch them talking about the video and then watch and listen to what the CEO of JP Morgan Chase actually has to say.
Jamie Dimon, who has been the CEO, the person who runs pretty much the biggest bank in the world, JP Morgan, for 2 decades now, he came out and he spoke to his investors talking about what he thinks is going on in the markets and how JP Morgan is positioning itself to ensure that no matter what happens, they come out on top. Now, there's been a fair amount of news about this topic and this event because actually Jamie Dimon came out and used one word which has really instilled fear in an awful lot of people. In short, he said that a hurricane is coming for the American economy and that no one knows what's going to happen next, but his gut tells him it's pretty bad. Now, if you're like me, you probably weren't satisfied with just watching that 20 or 30-second clip that seems to be going around everywhere, so you probably spent some time trying to find the full hour-long interview. And unfortunately, you probably couldn't find it because I couldn't find it either. In fact, I spent about 2 hours today scouring the web trying to find access to this full interview, but I just couldn't. And it turned out the reason I couldn't find it, and the reason you probably haven't seen anything longer than that 30-second clip where Jamie Dimon says the word hurricane, is because actually JP Morgan are trying to keep this interview on the down low. To get access to this, I basically had to cosplay as a real financial journalist, give over details of my company, my role within my company, my name, my address, and everything like that, just to get to even watch this video. I thought then it might be a little bit useful to show you some more context into what he was saying, why he thinks there's a hurricane coming, and everything in between. So firstly, I'm going to show you a clip that you probably, actually almost definitely, haven't seen so far about the 3 horsemen of this next apocalypse that Jamie Dimon is predicting.
And you mentioned storm clouds.
Yeah, I'm going to change the storm clouds because I said there are 3 things that we're going through, which are, I hate the word unprecedented, which are kind of unprecedented. And you got to put this in back of your mind when you've seen things that have never happened before, then you have to question your ability to predict. Okay, one is huge growth in this country driven by fiscal and monetary stimulation. That isn't a normal recovery. Okay, and that fiscal stimulation is still in the pocketbooks of consumers. They're spending it. They're spending at very strong levels. And the data is completely distorted. It's distorted by inflation. It's distorted by they went from goods back to services. It's distorted by all these things. But jobs are plentiful. Wages are going up. Consumers are spending. The lower income folks, not quite as much as before, but everybody else, it looks like they have $2 trillion more. Savings rate drop. I don't think that's going to stop their spending in 6 or 9 months. So that to me is the bright clouds out there. But it's different. The Fed has to meet this now with raising rates and QT. And the new part of this isn't the raising rates, it's the QT. The QT we've never had QE before like this. Therefore, we've never had QT like this. So you're looking at something they're going to be writing history books on for 50 years. What was QE? What worked? What didn't work? I think a lot of parts of QE backfired. I think the negative rates was probably a huge mistake for a whole bunch of different reasons I won't bore you with now. But they're going to have to raise rates. And in my view, they have to do QT. They do not have a choice because there's so much liquidity in the system. They have to remove some of the liquidity to stop the speculation, to reduce home prices, stuff like that. And you've never been through QT. So all the major buyers, if you go back to 2010 and say, who are all the major buyers of treasuries? All that time, it was central banks, foreign exchange managers, banks who were topping up their liquidity profiles because we had to for regulations. All 3, it won't happen the go round. Banks are topped up, foreign exchange managers are topped up, the central bank will be selling, not buying, and governments have much more fiscal deficit to finance. That's a huge change in the flow of funds around the world. I don't know what the effect of that is. I'm prepared for, I tell you, a minimum huge volatility. And the third thing is Ukraine. That you've not had a European land war since 1945, okay? And the complexity of Ukraine is we don't know the outcome. I always make a list, if you predict the outcome. Well, you couldn't predict the outcome of Vietnam, Korea, Afghanistan, Iraq, 10 other conflagrations. All wrong. Wars go bad. They go south, they have unintended consequences, and this happens to be roiling the commodity markets of the world. Wheat, oil, gas, and stuff like that, which in my view will continue. We're not taking the proper actions to protect Europe from what's going to happen in oil in the short run, and we're not taking the proper actions to protect you all what's going to happen to oil in the next 5 years, which means it almost has to go up the price. We're not investing enough money, to keep oil a number. And for all those who love climate change, if oil prices go to 175 or 150, which I kind of think is in the cards to tell you the truth, not in the immediate run, but down the road, then CO2 won't go down, which is everyone predicts because people buy less oil and gas. It's going to go up because all those other countries out there, the poor countries who need oil and gas to feed and heat their citizens, will not buy oil and gas, they'll buy coal. That's what's going to happen. CO2 will go up, it won't come down. And we're not dealing with these challenges. So those 3 things, fiscally induced growth, QT, Ukraine war,
So the first major issue that Jamie Dimon is really worried about is this unprecedented level of growth that we've seen, not just over the last 2 years, but actually over the last decade and a half. And the reason he's worried by it is because it isn't natural growth. It isn't coming about from entrepreneurs building brand new innovative businesses. It isn't coming about from people spending more of their disposable income or earning more money. It's come about from gross monetary policy.
I'm going to come back to this point, but I want you to log this. He's talking about the fact that this so-called recovery, the post-2008 global financial crisis recovery, came on the back of loose, easy money rather than real productivity. I'm going to come back to that point because that underpins all of the problems that we're about to face, and it also points the way to the solution for what you can do in your own life to protect yourself against what's coming. So Down Under Drover says, first time in my life I feel despair today. Buddy, stick around. All right, watch this to the end because I am going to talk about the things that you can do. There are things beyond our control. We can't do stuff about that, but there are things that you can do. So please, mate, I understand that. I understand how you're feeling. I have my days as well. But just do me a favor, stick around to the end. All right, don't leave partway through because we're starting off with all the bad news. Then we're going to talk about what to do about it. All right. So this is what he's talking about. He's talking about the fact that this was an empty economic recovery. The so-called growth that we've seen for the last 14 years since 2008 hasn't been real. It's been on the back of easy money. I'll come back to that later.
From a government and a central bank that is just printing money willy-nilly. Basically, he's worried because this level of growth that we've seen that fueled this massive bull run over the last decade and a half came from quantitative easing. Now, the other problem with quantitative easing is that actually it is still rather unprecedented. It has happened twice in human history. The first time was with Japan over the last couple of decades in an attempt to revitalize their struggling economy, and in short, it didn't really work out. The other time we've seen quantitative easing, the only other time in history it's ever occurred, has been over the last 15 years in the post-housing market crash era. Now, the problem with that is that this era of quantitative easing hasn't stopped. We never got to the other side. In reality, the money printer was turned on back in 2008 and it hasn't been switched off since. And so when it does get turned off, no one really knows what's going to happen because there is no precedent. Now, the second major headwind facing our economies, according to Jamie Dimon, is the fact that actually the Federal Reserve doesn't have a choice and it has to end quantitative easing now, and it has to start the next major problem, quantitative tightening, which has literally never been seen before in human history. It is entirely unprecedented. As a result of that, there is no evidence to look at. There is no history. You cannot look back to see what happened in the past and try to use that to gauge what will happen in the future. All we can do is try to model what we think is going to happen and pray that we don't miss something major. Now, Dimon also came out and said that actually it's essential that quantitative tightening happens because there's just so much excess liquidity in the markets and it is fueling rampant speculation that is causing this ridiculous level of inflation that we've seen grow over the last year. And in particular, one thing that he did say, and he only mentioned it for a few seconds and most people probably glossed over it, he said that actually quantitative tightening has to happen to cause house prices to fall. Now, on the surface, that's a good thing. Lower housing prices means more people have access to the market. But the problem is that most people have debt on their house and most people use their house as a sort of retirement and investment fund in and of itself. So when prices fall, I'm afraid it isn't as simple as just new people can enter the market and all is good and happy. Now, finally, the third horseman of Jamie Dimon's apocalypse is, of course, the Ukraine war, the first major.
All right, I'm going to skip over this. Yes, the Ukraine war is significant, but it's not actually significant because it's in Europe. It's significant because it's in the sort of the globalized trading economy. But we come back to this fella here, and I'll just try and find where that happens because what he says at the end here, I think, is very, very relevant.
You know, I said there's storm clouds. They're big storm clouds. It's a hurricane. Right now it's kind of sunny. Things are doing fine. You know, everyone thinks the Fed can handle this. That hurricane is right out there down the road coming our way. We just don't know if it's a minor one or Superstorm Sandy or Sandy or Andrew or something like that. And it's you better brace yourself. So JP Morgan's bracing ourselves, and we're going to be very conservative in our balance sheet on with all this capital uncertainty. We're going to have to take actions, and I kind of want to shut down the non-operating deposits again, which we can do in size. To protect ourselves so we could serve clients in bad times. And so That's the environment we're dealing with. And, you know, I think it's okay to hope that'll end up okay. I hope it. That's my Goldilocks. I hope. Who the hell knows?
All right. So that's the CEO of JP Morgan saying, I hope it's all going to be okay. Who the hell knows? That's as optimistic. He was looking for an optimistic way to finish, and that was as good as he could give. Now, someone asked the question, who is this guy?
Be abundantly clear.
The channel is called Stoic Finance. They're on YouTube, Stoic Finance. That's their video that I've just played for you. And he did quite a lot of work to actually even get a hold of the Jamie Dimon interview, you know, insofar as what he showed. So obviously what JP Morgan is saying is that on behalf of their clients and on behalf of their owners, their shareholders, they are taking steps to protect themselves against what's coming. And his views are pretty unambiguous. He doesn't see rosy, happy things coming down the road. Now, there's been a lot of comments over the course of that, as you know, multiple people saying, yeah, we already knew this. Yes, we did. Yes, we did. Okay. This isn't news to anyone that's been paying attention. I love the fact, Michael, please keep trolling. I love it. You're about 100 comments in already. Whereas, yeah, Topher has you running scared. Haha. QT has happened before. The US did QT in 2018. Like that's ancient history. Like 2022 isn't possibly when the chickens are going to come home to roost from the stupidity that's happened since 2008. Thank you very much. Forget 2018, since 2008. So keep on commenting, mate. I do appreciate it. Okay, so what we're facing is a situation where we are deep into completely unknown territory. Now, unknown doesn't automatically mean apocalyptic, right? It just means unknown. But there are some reasons to have some fairly legitimate concerns about where we're headed from an economic point of view. And the biggest one is the point that was made earlier in that video about how the recovery was not led by actual productivity in goods and services, but was actually led by easy money. Let me talk about that. And the reason I want to talk about this is because this is actually where the solution is hidden. It's not immediately obvious, but this is actually where the solution is hidden. When we measure the economy, we measure a thing called gross domestic product, GDP, and a bunch of other measures, and they're all denominated in dollars, right? Now, dollars, they're a tricky thing. They change in value over time. Inflation, CPI, you know, dollars are worth less today than what they were 100 years ago or 10 years ago. So we're always having to adjust and accommodate. But the actual big fundamental problem with measuring an economy in dollars is that it's actually useless. The dollar side of the transaction isn't the side that matters. That's just trying to match up with the side that does matter, and that is the value being provided. If you're getting a family, you know, if you're getting enough groceries to feed the family for a week, it's not, the significance is not whether that's $1 or $100 or $1,000. That's just a nominal thing. What matters is you've got enough food to feed the family for a week. Now, the dollars matter in that they change, right? If it cost you $100 this week and next week it cost you $1,000, now you're seriously hurting. But if the Australian dollar was such that it just had always cost us $1,000 and our salaries were therefore 20 times higher than what they are in response, well, then you wouldn't know or care. Right now, it costs, you know, $100, $200 a week to feed a family, depending on how you eat and how big your family is. It used to cost $40, but we consider it pretty normal for it to be 100, 150, 200. The dollar denominated value isn't actually the important side of the transaction. It's actually the food, right? It's the fact that whatever on the other side of that transaction, you can feed your family for a week now. What happens when money gets pumped into an economy, meaningless money that is being thrown out there in return for nothing? This is the important bit. The government is pushing money out into the economy. They're lending money on nothing. They're lending money on speculative businesses. They're just trying to get money into the economy. What's missing is the other side of the transaction, the value, the actual return. That's the GDP measure, you know, where the Australian economy is worth X many $1 trillion. That's only worth something if it represents something in return. It's not the dollars themselves that matter. I mean, if that was the case, Zimbabwe with its $1 trillion notes would be the richest country on earth. It's not the dollar value that matters. It's what's coming back on the other side of the transaction. And the problem with quantitative easing, the problem with easy money, is that there isn't value coming back on the other side of the transaction, right? Quick, simple, silly thought experiment just to illustrate this problem. You're on an island with one other person, okay? Stupid little thought experiment. There's $100 on the island. You've got $50 each. And what you do is you go, right, I'm going to build a shelter and I'm going to let you rent space in the shelter that I build. And you work your ass off for a week building this great shelter, keeps you warm, protected from the wind, everything else. The other person goes, I'm going to go and find fresh water and food. And you're sitting there paying each other. So they pay you for accommodation. You pay them for food and water, okay? And there's money going backwards and forwards between you. But in return, on the other side of that transaction, there is value being provided. There is shelter and safety. There is food and there is water. On another island, you've got two people sitting there and they just sit there and go, well, we'll just hand each other money and we'll have a bigger GDP. We'll have money going, I'll give you some sand. 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 You're paying. Money is flying backwards and forwards, but there is no value in that economy. No value has been created. Now, that might sound like a dumb analogy, but here's the crazy thing. There is a school of thought in economics. It's called the broken windows fallacy, or at least on my side of economics, it's known as the broken windows fallacy. Where, was it Paul Krugman originally, or was it, it might have been John Maynard Keynes might have been the original one to come out with it. And then Krugman sort of picked it up. Talked about how even a broken window brings value to the economy, right? Because someone has to make a new window. Someone has to transport the new window to the building. Someone has to install the new window. So all these people are being paid money, right? So it's good for the economy. You break a window, you stimulate the economy. Well, hang on. Yes, you've stimulated money movement. Money is moving from one person to the other. But in the end, the economy, the country, the place is only as good as it was to start with. Money has moved, but no value has been created. This is the distinction. This is the difference. Money has moved, but you're only back where you started. Breaking windows and having them repaired doesn't work in real economic terms. It's like digging a hole and filling it back in again. It doesn't achieve anything in real economic terms. But therein lies the key. Because you can provide value regardless of the situation with money. And if you're creating something valuable, then it actually doesn't matter what happens with the money. If you've got food, if you've got shelter, if you've got energy, if you've got things that you can barter and trade and provide to other people, you can provide value. And it actually doesn't matter what happens on the other side of that transaction, whether it's money or whether it's other people's services or goods or what have you that's coming back on the other side of that transaction. My point here is other people in the comments have already picked up. The point is that we're heading into an era where your ability to do something valuable for those around you is going to be more important than ever before. And the people that are actually going to end up hurting are the people that have had these glorified desk jobs, in banking and finance and what have you, where they're just pushing money around and everything that they do exists only in this monetary sphere. They're the ones that are actually really going to find themselves finding a new career. But those that can really do something valuable, the future is actually not that scary. Because whatever happens with the money side of the transaction is actually not that relevant. You can still provide value. And that means that you can barter and trade with other people for things of value in return. And that's actually, so the flaw with quantitative easing is also the secret to navigating the next 10 years. As we reap the consequences of quantitative easing, all this meaningless free money, right, that has, goodness, we have been so stupid. But understand that if the problem was easy money with no value on the other side of the transaction, the solution is value regardless of what happens on the money side of the transaction. Even in an inflation era, if you can provide value now to somebody, then they'll pay you in now dollars, inflated dollars, or they'll pay you in another good or another service, whatever you'll accept. And you can still live well. In fact, you can do very well, even in high inflation times, but only if you have something of value to offer. That's going to be the key heading into the economic era that we're heading for. All right, someone just asked, when am I doing a Q&A? Happy to do a Q&A. Where was that question? Yeah, skill sets are your value, 100%. I'll barter for some hens. Chickens laying hens are going to be very, very valuable. Yep, so NASCAR 2004. When am I doing a Q&A? I'm happy to take some questions now. So if you've got a question, chuck it in now. I know far from everything, and I'm very happy to say I don't know the answer to that. If you ask a question I don't know the answer to, I either just won't put it on the screen, or I'll put it on the screen and say, I don't know. But if you do happen to ask a question that I actually have an answer for, then I'll do my best. Should the government sell transport services? Let me say something really unpopular. The government shouldn't be involved in the transport business at all. At all. Shouldn't. Terrible idea. I'm an electrician. My trade will be irrelevant when they revert back to the Stone Age because they've turned off the power for good. No, not at all. See, here's what excites me. Let me go a little bit sideways from my earlier point. We've actually just reached a moment in technology where it's possible for an individual household or a small town or a farm or a factory to be independent from an electricity energy point of view, from a water supply point of view. We've actually just, we reached an era. We've had an era for 250, 300 years, or I mean, going back to the Romans, if you want to, where the ability of a city, of a household within a city to survive was dependent on the infrastructure of the city, the aqueducts and the sewage systems and everything else that came along with being in the city. The resident, the citizen of the city was dependent on the infrastructure provided by the city. We've just moved in the last 20 years, thanks to advancements in electricity sort of generation and storage technology. We've just entered an era where it's actually possible for someone on a suburban block of land to be completely independent. In terms of water, you'd have to be careful, but you could do it. In terms of energy, not just solar, but if you had solar with some wind and you were willing to rug up instead of turning on a heater, then you could do pretty well from an energy point of view. And not entirely in terms of food, but if you were getting your carbs, if you were managing to get some rice and some pasta and things like that in, you can actually, in a decent-sized suburban backyard, you could support a family. We've actually reached this really interesting moment in history where, thanks to whether it's electrical technology, whether it's fertilizer technology, vertical gardens and hydroponics and various other things, if you put your mind to it, you could actually survive completely independently in a first world lifestyle. You'd be working hard. You'd be getting up in the morning and working until you went to bed, but you could actually live really well. You could have a television. Whether there's anything being broadcast for you to watch is another question entirely, but you could have a television. You've got a DVD player. You can watch stuff. You can play your computer games. You can do all that stuff if you want to, because you've got your own electricity. You can have your own septic system if you choose to. The technology is there now. You can have your own water supply, again, limited by where you live and the amount of rainfall, etc., and the amount of roof area you've got. But the technology is actually there now for us to no longer be dependent on the infrastructure provided by the government and by the system at large. And this is another opportunity that we have now, where maybe not at an individual level, although it's certainly possible if you've got the money, but certainly at a small group level, at a group of houses, at a small community, at a neighborhood level. It's actually going to be possible, regardless of what happens in the bigger scheme of things, for us to get together and support each other and still be able to live relatively well. And in fact, that's where I'm headed at the end of this. That's actually where I'm going. So no, Nick, I don't think your job is going to be irrelevant at all. I would just suggest you make sure you're across, how to do sort of solar systems with controllers that can take charge from solar panels, from wind, and can put it into battery storage and maybe be hooked in with the grid and kick in when the grid fails, or recharge from the grid and kick in when the grid fails, etc. Make sure you understand that stuff, and I think you'll be just fine. Currently have silver beet, spinach, carrot. Oh no, it reset. Where was I? Oh, there it is. Seedlings sprouting, have other seeds ready for warmer months. Good on you. Okay. Other people talking about silver and that sort of stuff. I'm not going to give financial advice, but yeah, some precious metals I think make sense. Yeah, see, this is the interesting thing, Kesho. I'm not sure that that's the case. Sorry, let me get the cigar going again. I don't necessarily buy into this idea that there's some central group of people sort of controlling everything. I think there is a central group of people, or multiple different central groups of people, who would like to control everything, but I don't think anyone's actually achieved that yet. And in fact, they're often in competition with each other. And so it's all much messier than I think some people assume. But no, I don't think QE is actually going to ramp up. I do actually think we're going to see a quantitative tightening. That's certainly what the CEO of JP Morgan was just saying in that video I showed you. Sorry, just going to make sure it warms up properly now. So no, I think we're going to see quantitative tightening. I think we're going to see credit tightening. I think it's possible that we're going to see the value of houses decline. I'm not predicting it necessarily. There's so many variables in all these things. It is very hard to predict. But I do think we're in for some tough economic times as a result of the easy money tap being turned off. I think that's reasonably evident. Thoughts on crypto? I think crypto is useful. I certainly wouldn't be selling the house to put into crypto. People are saying, oh, crypto's dying right now. Look at how much it's crashed. Yeah, it's crashed a little bit more than what the stock market's crashed. Fair enough. The stock market has crashed back to where it was in 2020. Crypto's crashed back to what it was in 2020, 21. In percentage terms, it's a much bigger crash, but in time terms, it's a similar, not a dissimilar crash. Crypto is very volatile, and it will continue to be so for a while. My biggest concern with crypto at the moment is, in theory, and when I say crypto, I'm really talking about Bitcoin. I am a bit of a Bitcoin hodler as opposed to other sort of coins. I think other coins have their place, but if I'm holding for value, then that's me personally. I'm in Bitcoin, tiny amount of it, but I've got some. But what concerns me is that, in theory, the function of Bitcoin and the design of Bitcoin should make it a hedge. Now, if it's a hedge, then that should mean that when times get tough, it goes up rather than down. But instead, we see it mimicking the stock market. What that tells me is that a very large percentage of people in crypto are speculators rather than holders or people actually running their lives out of crypto. They are speculators. They're in it for the profit. And when they get afraid, they get cold feet, they bail out, and that's what drives this really volatile price movement. What I'm waiting for is the day when bad news hits and Bitcoin actually goes up rather than following the stock market down, because that will tell me that it's maturing out of this speculative phase and into a more mature, either an actual practical phase where it's being genuinely used by people, or into a phase where the majority of people holding it are actually holding it because they believe in its long-term value as a hedge. So I don't think it's matured yet. I think it's something that we should all understand how to use. I certainly don't think we should be putting our life savings into it, but it's one of those technologies that I think is going to be really relevant for the rest of my life and well beyond. So I think it's worth knowing about, but not betting the house on. And that gets lots of people really upset when I say that, because most people either want you to write off Bitcoin or to be a massive Bitcoin fanboy, and there's no room for anyone in between. Well, tough luck. Okay. Okay, thoughts on World Economic Forum and other similar bodies. It's only half lit. The World Economic Forum and the recent conflab that happened where, who was it? It wasn't the UWF, it was UN. I can't remember who it was that convened it. We were all supposed to sign up to their, to letting them manage Australia in a pandemic, right? The whole world was supposed to sign up so that they could decide what we got to do whenever there was the next pandemic. And this illustrates my point that I made a minute ago. There are people that want to rule the world. That's unquestionable. They tell us that they want to rule. The WF wants to rule the world. UN wants to rule the world. There's a bunch of other bodies that want to rule the world. What's really interesting is that they didn't get what they wanted. It was in Davos. It was whatever the most recent conflab in Davos was. They didn't get what they wanted. A whole bunch of African countries, along with India, along with China, along with a couple of other major world powers or emerging world powers, refused to sign up to it. They didn't get what they wanted. So my question for people that believe there's these groups that run the world, well, how come they didn't get what they wanted? If they really had as much power as some people give them credit for, how come they didn't get what they wanted? They've had to push it back to 2024. They'll bring it up again in 2 years and try their luck then, right? So these groups, they think they know how to rule the world. They think they know how to live your life better than you do. And they can't understand why everyone else isn't falling at their feet and worshiping them and giving them all the power in the world. And the fact is, of course, you and I understand very well why we're not doing that. Do they want to rule the world? Yes, they absolutely do. Will they get to? I'm not sure. So, Vern, why can't you admit that this is completely by design? For the exact reason that I just said. Right? There are people so focused on, oh, this thing happened. That must be a conspiracy. It must be designed, must be engineered that way. Well, look at all the things that aren't going their way. Look at all the things that they're not successfully achieving, that they're setting out to achieve, and tell me that they really run the world as much as you think they do. I just don't buy it. Julie, I believe they're deliberately crashing the economy to institute the Great Reset. Am I right? No, I don't think you are. I think there are opportunists. The World Economic Forum, the Great Reset, yes, it's obviously a thing. They talk about it. What I would describe them as is the never let a crisis go to waste type people. The crisis that we're having now became inevitable about 40 years ago. And the reason why it's going to be so bad is because we've been kicking the can down the road for 40 years. And every time they kicked the can down the road and delayed the inevitable, they made it worse at the same time. So now finally, it's getting to the point where the house of cards is just going to fall over. They've stacked it up so high, it's just not physically possible to kick the can down the road again. And here we go with what may well prove to be the biggest collapse in human history. I don't think it's being deliberately crashed to institute the Great Reset. I think it's being crashed in spite of the efforts of some people to keep it going. And people like the World Economic Forum are there licking their lips going, ooh, goody, our time has come. And they're going to try and swoop in and save us all with the Great Reset. But I don't think it's actually a conspiracy to actually institute the Great Reset. I think it's opportunism on their part. You know what? I have, but I know nothing about it. That does ring a bell, though. I'll have a look into it. The One Small Town Initiative by Michael Tellinger. I do know it. Yeah, I do, but I can't put the pieces together. Sounds like decent traders will survive. Decent traders will, at the very least, have skills to trade with other people for. All right. Go off grid if you can afford it. If you can afford it being the key word there, it's not cheap, unfortunately. Do I think the election was rigged in any way? I don't think it was rigged in any meaningful way. Did people try and do things here and there? Yeah. Okay, they did. Do I think it was rigged at a big, grand level, at the AEC level or at the government level? No, I really don't think it was. Question: pandemic regulations and mandates have left me out of a job and with no savings. Am I screwed? I'm also out of a job, and we're getting pretty low on savings. So I feel your pain. My wife is able to keep working; she runs her own business, but her business is not. It's not in an industry that is thriving under the current economic circumstances. So the one business that's keeping me in cigars is my cigar business, which I do appreciate. No, you're not screwed. I'm going to talk at the end about the things that you can do. So stick around for that. I'm going to talk about the Grand Solar Minimum first. More bad news. Hey, everybody, there's more bad news coming. Grand Solar Minimum, if you don't know about it, it is completely non-controversial. This isn't coming from some woo-woo conspiracy theory, whatever. You can find it on NASA's on the NOAA's website. You can find it on the BOM. You can find it everywhere. It's happening. Just no one's talking about it. So I'm going to talk about it just like I did 14 months ago. What can we do, Topher? I'll talk about that at the end. Okay. Wood fire, yes. Yeah, this is an interesting one. Look, I don't know this stuff in this level of detail. Okay, so I'm not going to try and make a prediction here, but I think it's a good question. It's worth using this question just to stimulate people's thinking, because a high inflation environment, it affects different industries differently, depending on the types of demand and how elastic that demand is. In other words, how optional is the purchase? Drinking water is not an optional purchase. It's very inelastic. You're going to get water to drink. Shower water is much more elastic. You can shorten your showers or maybe start skipping a few showers if you absolutely have to in order to survive. So just to give you a very simple example, you could cut down on your drinking water down to just what you drink very, very easily, down to that certain point, and then beyond that point, it's not elastic anymore. And you could shower in creek water if you absolutely had to. That's much more elastic. So, Topher, in a high inflation environment, do you believe meat, fiber, grain farmers will benefit, or rising costs will keep the status quo, or will demand simply stagnate while people finally pull belts in? This actually really comes, this will be affected a lot more by what I'm about to talk about in the Grand Solar Minimum. I actually, and I don't want to be naively optimistic, but I actually think that the southeast of Australia, and by that I mean if you draw a line between Brisbane and Adelaide, everything southeast of there, is actually fairly well placed in this regard. So, Andrew, actually, I'm gonna postpone the conversation on that. I think it's an important conversation, but I'm going to postpone that till after I talk a little bit about the Grand Solar Minimum. Okay. I'm sticking around long enough to vote in the state election. I won't be running in the state election. Oh goodness, I don't know. Should or shouldn't buy a house. She's worried, is uncertain. I honestly don't know. We're asking ourselves the same thing. Do we? Don't we? I don't know. I wish I had an answer to that one. I'm trying to make a bike or something I can use to power my Xbox. Solar panels are a little bit easier, but whatever floats your boat. Okay, so it just skipped a whole bunch of comments. Sorry, my feed here does weird things. So I'm sorry. Just trying to find if I can find where I was up to. No, I can't. It's just keeps resetting. Okay. Okay. All right. Let's talk about the Grand Solar Minimum. The other piece of really interesting news. Now, I want to refer you back to April the 8th, 2021. I did a dive into this stuff 14 months ago. And I said to you, I may be wrong, but it's very easy as the next year or two passes, it's going to be very easy to tell if I'm wrong. If it gets warmer, I'm wrong. If it gets colder, I might be right. It doesn't automatically prove I'm right, but I might be right. Well, guess what? We have just had the coldest start to winter, at least down here in Melbourne. I don't know about the rest of Australia, but down here in Melbourne, the coldest start to winter since I believe the 1960s is what they're saying. So I said 14 months ago, if I'm right, it's going to get colder. It's gotten colder. Doesn't automatically mean I'm right. It just means that it hasn't proven me wrong yet. I may yet prove to be wrong. But at this point in time, the available evidence is lining up with what I did predict. The coming period of global cooling is going to be a revelation to many. I agree. 100%, yes, it does. It's completely non-controversial. The 11-year sunspot cycle exists. You can get your own little telescope, put the correct filter on it. Please put the correct filter on it, or you will go blind. Put the correct filter on it, and you can look at the sun, and you can count them yourself, and you can measure it. It most certainly does exist. Coldest since World War I in Melbourne, absolutely. So we know for a fact that the sun goes into quiet periods. We call them grand solar minimums. This is not controversial. The biggest one on record that we actually have observational records where someone was looking at the sun and measuring sunspots is called the Maunder minimum. It happened approximately 400 years ago through to about 300 years ago-ish. It went for a bit over 100 years, and it was freaking cold. The Thames River was freezing over. Yes, the Thames River in London was freezing over every winter, and they were having an ice skating festival on the Thames River every single winter. They used to grow grapes in Scandinavia. They can't do that anymore, you may have noticed. They're now down in France and down in Spain. The list of impacts that mini ice ages have had on the climate, and this is within observed history. This is within what we actually have records for, direct records for. They can then go back further than that through proxy records. So we don't have observational records of sunspots before about the year 1600-ish. But we can go back in proxy records and actually have a look and extrapolate what was the sun doing at this time, what happened to the climate at that time. And we can go right back to what's known as the Wolf minimum. And so we have the Wolf minimum early this millennia or early last millennia. We have the Maunder minimum. We had a very brief Dalton minimum that was only about 30, 35 years long. It was the mildest of the minimums that we've seen. We're now heading into another minimum. Now, when I say a minimum, I don't mean the 11-year minimum. Okay, so there's an 11-year cycle where the sun ramps up, gets quite busy with lots of sunspots, lots of magnetic activity, lots of spewing out of coronal mass ejections, etc., that do affect the Earth in various ways. And then it dies down again. Fewer sunspots, fewer magnetic activity, less magnetic activity, a weaker solar wind that makes us more susceptible to other cosmic rays and other forms of radiation that are floating around space, that the sun actually kind of protects us from. When the sun is strong and is putting out a lot of mass, a lot of energy, it actually helps to protect us from. When the sun goes quiet, we become more vulnerable to some of that other stuff that's flying around. All of that's non-controversial, 11-year cycle. We also know that those cycles are not all the same. Some are stronger than others. And if you have a look, I put an image up as the thumbnail for this slow chat. And you can see the mapping there of these regular sun cycles going along, and they get stronger, and they tend to go in patterns where they'll get, one will get stronger, and then one will get stronger again, and then one will get even stronger, and then it'll sort of tap out, and the next one will be a little bit weaker, and the next one will be a little bit weaker, and eventually it goes down into a grand solar minimum, where it's not just the bottom of an 11-year cycle, but sometimes it actually kind of stops and kind of bumps along and really doesn't do anything. And if the Maunder minimum is anything to go by, you can get well over 100 years of almost no solar activity. I mean, very minimum levels of solar activity for over 100 years. And this is the concern. We don't know yet whether the minimum that we're heading into is going to be like something like the Dalton minimum, 35 odd years, a bit cold, more volcanoes than usual. There's various other things that happen as a result of it. I'm not going to go deep into that side of it. But it leads to a decline in the Earth's average temperature of maybe a degree and a half, something like the Maunder minimum, maybe 2 degrees at its more extreme. Might last for 30, 35 years, and then we're all good. The problem is it could also be a Maunder minimum, 100 years. Or because we only have 400 years of observational history, we don't know what's possible. We don't know what could actually happen on a semi-regular basis. We've no idea. And at this moment, we just don't know. All we know is that the last couple of solar cycles have been weaker than the ones preceding them. We're heading into what's known as solar cycle 25 at the moment. It's currently ramping up towards its peak, but it's looking like it is going to be extremely weak, which is what was predicted. That is consistent with the pattern that we've been seeing, that this current solar cycle is going to be very small and very weak. And after that, we don't know what's going to happen. Are we going to see a kick in of a new round of solar cycles that slowly get stronger again, etc., over the next 30, 40, 50 years? It's possible. I certainly can't say that that won't happen. But it's also very possible that we're going to see a Dalton minimum, 35 years of really very little activity. It's very possible we're going to see 100 years. It's possible we could see a lot longer than that. So let's talk about what are the implications of that. What would that mean for us here in the southeast of Australia? I'm going to be talking mostly about the southeast because the Murray-Darling Basin, because of all the work I've done investigating that area, and the southeast of Australia generally, because that's where I've lived all my life, is the area that I have the most data on. So if you're watching from North Queensland or from WA, etc., I'm sorry, I don't have good data for you. But I've got some information for the southeast of Australia. So historically, we don't know for sure what happens in Australia during a grand solar minimum because we only have records going back 180, 200, 220 years, depending on where in Australia you're talking about. We don't have actual hard written records before that. So there is a certain amount of sort of scientific speculation, informed guesswork that has to go on. And then I'm reading what the scientists are saying and I'm trying to translate it to you. So take everything with a grain of salt. But I do think we can make some reasonable assessments about what is likely. What appears very, very likely to me is that a grand solar minimum is going to take us back to weather that we did observe in Australia within recorded history in Australia, written history in Australia. And in particular, the rainfall patterns and the weather patterns that we saw between about 1900 and 1950. Now, for those of you who are on the land, who have history on the land, if you're on a farm, multi-generational farm, you'll know that 1900 to 1950 was overall a pretty good period in southeastern Australia. Pretty good harvests, pretty good rain at the right times of year. Of course, there were issues within it. I'm not saying it was some perfect little epoch, but on average, it was a little bit cooler than what we are now, and it was a little bit wetter than what we are now. And the rains were fairly good, clean, seasonal rains coming at the right time. As best as we can figure, and I say we because I'm reading the research of a bunch of other people and trying to make sense of it. It is likely, by no means guaranteed, that is what Australia's weather in the southeast will move towards for at least the next 35 odd years, if not longer. A little bit cooler, wetter, but with fairly pronounced seasons. Okay, so Peter is pointing out, yes, apart from the Federation drought, absolutely, but I'm including that in that period because we are still going to, weather is variable. It is highly variable. And even in this 30-year to 100-year period, we are going to see droughts. We're going to see variations on it's not going to be consistent every single year is exactly the same as the one before. It's just not how it works. So even allowing for the Federation drought, what we saw from 1900 to 1950 was overall, and the data's there, was overall wetter than what we saw from 1951 to the year 2000, 2010. Right? There's a step change. There's the average line is here, and then the average line is here, and the change happened halfway through the 1900s, halfway through the 20th century. And it is reasonable to infer, based on what the sun was doing at the time. So we're coming out of what's known as the modern maximum for the sun. So the last half of the 20th century, we had stronger solar cycles. And those stronger solar cycles have at least coincided with, and I think it's reasonable to infer that they had a causal relationship with the increase in temperatures in Southeast Australia and a reduction in rainfall in Southeast Australia. So as the sun eases its way back down, it's reasonable to infer that we're going to see a drop in average temperatures and a somewhat increase in rainfall. Now, it so happens, I said this publicly 14 months ago. You can look at it. You can go back in my videos tab on my Facebook page, 8th of April, 2021. And I said we should see a drop in temperatures and an increase in rainfall. And what we've seen in the 14 months since then has been an overall, on average, drop in temperatures and an overall, on average, increase in rainfall, a devastating increase in rainfall in some parts of Australia, unfortunately. Now, does that prove that I'm right? No, it does not. It's a tiny, tiny, tiny little sample. But it certainly doesn't prove that I'm wrong. And when you look at what's happening with the sun and the dominant role that the sun plays in the Earth's weather, and you form a hypothesis and you publicly state that hypothesis, and then the data lines up with that hypothesis, you start to go, well, I'm starting to get convinced here. I'm starting to be pretty confident. Now, let me give you a few counterpoints, a few counter arguments that might explain what's happened with the temperature and with the rain without the solar cycle being involved. What we've also seen over this time that we know does cause increased rainfall in Southeast Australia. We've had a La Nina. That's pretty much everyone knows about La Nina. We've had a negative Indian Ocean dipole. Not everyone knows about what that is, but think of it as sort of a La Nina, but at the other end of Australia, off the coast of Western Australia. And we've also had the Southern Ocean oscillation. I can't remember if that's in positive or negative, which way around that goes. But all three of those have lined up this year to create wetter weather in southeastern Australia. So there are those who say, no, it's not the sun, it's these other factors. However, I would make the counter argument that those factors are the way they are because of what the sun is doing. That the sun is ultimately the driving engine behind all of these other, whether they're tidal patterns, whether ocean movements, ocean currents, warm and cold oscillations, the Southern Ocean, the Indian Ocean, etc., are very much influenced by what the sun is doing. And therefore, whilst they're correct to say, oh, but it's because of these things, the Indian Ocean dipole, the Southern Ocean, La Nina, these are the things that brought the rainfall. Yes, but the sun is the thing that made all of those things line up at the one time. However, it is still reasonable to infer that all three of those won't stay lined up, right? They are going to switch, they are going to move, they are going to change. And so what we've seen this year may not be the beginning of some dropping off the cliff of temperatures or what have you. We may actually see a bit of a rebound next year as, let's say, La Nina might move into El Nino, although that's unlikely. The Indian Ocean dipole may reverse. Southern Ocean will shift. We know that. and that may bring a slight recovery in temperatures. It might mean that rainfall won't quite be as strong as what it was this year, and let's hope it's not for the sake of southeast Queensland and northern New South Wales. However, it is reasonable to infer that the heading into the grand solar minimum, which has now been being discussed for about 30 years, Maria not Maria, what is her name? There's a Russian scientist, Valentina Karkova, I think is her name. I'll try and look it up. Has been talking about this for a couple of decades now, and she was mocked to start with for even suggesting there was going to be a grand solar minimum. And slowly people are coming around as they realize, actually, we're heading into a grand solar minimum, and maybe she wasn't crazy after all. So I'm putting in a lot of disclaimers there because the fact is I don't know, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I do. But the evidence is lining up consistent with the hypothesis that we are entering a grand solar minimum. That's not controversial. The grand solar minimums lead to lower overall global temperatures and higher overall global rainfall. That's also not controversial. And Zarkova, thank you. Valentina Zarkova, thank you, John Roberts. I appreciate that. That's the person whose name I was trying to think of. She's been on this for about 30 years. And she was mocked, absolutely mocked and pilloried for talking about this. And she's being vindicated. She's being proven correct. So what the available data is lining up consistent with the hypothesis, not proving the hypothesis, but consistent with the hypothesis that the southeast of Australia is heading for 35 plus years. We don't know, but I would say at least 30 years of somewhat lower temperatures and somewhat higher rainfall. And along with that, likely to be somewhat better delineation between the seasons. Your summers are going to be summery, your winters are going to be wintry, and that's going to work a little bit better. Whereas in the last half of last century, we saw situations where rains were coming at very inconvenient times for our primary producers, etc. There should be a little bit less of that. So yeah, Valentina Zarkova is pretty bearish on this. She's quite convinced that it's going to be a full-blown grand solar minimum, like the Maunder minimum. Now, she knows a lot more about this than I do, so I'm not going to tell her she's wrong. But I'm also not going to stick my neck out and say I can predict a grand solar, like a full-blown grand solar minimum. I'm just saying all the evidence lines up to say that we're heading into a grand solar minimum of some sort. Which sort remains to be seen. Okay, so the problem with cooler times is growing produce. Yes and no. Yes and no. Loaded. Wrong. It's going to be the complete opposite of what Gopher says. Cool, mate. So yes and no. When it comes to things like orchards and things where they've had, let's take olives or almonds, whatever, it takes years for these plants to mature and actually give a crop. It's a real problem. When the climate changes, you can't just move the plants. You can't just dig them up and plant something else. But when it comes to your annual crops, your grains, most of your carbohydrates, a lot of your all your vegetables, and some of your fruits, depending, things like tomatoes, etc., but not your orchards. All your annual type crops, it's not as bad. A lot of your livestock, etc., it's not as bad. It's your grapevines, it's your plantations of your orchards, it's your nuts, that sort of stuff. It can really have a devastating impact on that because they've put a decade of work in just to get to the point where it's producing well, and then the climate changes. And it may not stop them from getting a yield, but it damages their yield. And that's where it can really affect those sorts of primary producers for sure. Andrew Hawley, Deniliquin Machinery says, I like your weather forecast, Topher. Listen, don't take it as gospel, right? Don't go spending money on the basis of my weather forecast. I'm just looking at the evidence, and that's how it lines up. That's just how it lines up. I can't see anything different. And all this fear mongering around what CO2 is going to do to our atmosphere and to global temperatures, etc. Well, I'm sorry, but the evidence hasn't lined up. They've been predicting rapidly escalating temperatures since the early 1980s or early 1970s. I think they started saying it, and we haven't seen it. We've seen a steady increase in temperature consistent with the trend that we were on previous to the Industrial Revolution, enabling us to produce as much carbon dioxide as we do. We haven't seen the predicted increase in hurricanes. We haven't seen the predicted increase in the rate of sea level rise. We haven't seen any of the disasters that were supposed to accompany man-made climate change. They haven't happened. And I did a deep dive into this some years ago with something called the 50-to-1 Project. And I had the privilege of interviewing a bunch of different people, most notable among which is Professor Fred Singer, who's since passed away. But if you go on YouTube and just go Topher Field, Fred Singer, you'll find my interview with him. He's the godfather of climatology. He's the one that everyone else learned off. And he's sitting there going, it's rubbish. It's rubbish. Atmospheric carbon dioxide is not going to drive a catastrophic change to the temperature. Maybe there might be some measurable difference at some point in time eventually, but we are not driving some climate catastrophe. Unfortunately, politically speaking, they've all bought into the idea that we are driving a warming catastrophe, and they're going to be caught completely off guard with their pants down by a grand solar minimum. So this is what concerns me, in addition to the economic situation, is that we're heading into a grand solar minimum in a world where we are very energy dependent, but we have a very fragile energy grid, as can be seen right now in Australia, where this thing called winter has put our grid under extraordinary stress. This thing called winter that can't possibly be predicted. This cold weather that comes around once every year, but we couldn't possibly have seen this coming. We couldn't have designed a grid to be able to cope with this, obviously. If our grid can't even handle winter, we're not well placed going into the next 10, 20, 30 years. Yeah, so someone's just mentioned, so Benjamin Robson, Ian Plimer, a world-leading geologist, the historian of climate change, has also called bullshit on global warming. He certainly has. I am due to interview him sometime soon, and in preparation for that interview, I'm actually reading his book right now, Green Murder by Ian Plimer. And yes, I read books and smoke cigars here when I get the chance, which is not nearly often enough. I'm supposed to have read that already by now, but I can't make the time. So absolutely, this is not crazy stuff. This is actually like serious-minded, actual scientists are sitting there going, the whole CO2 hypothesis has been busted, and we're heading into a grand solar minimum, which is going to take temperatures in the opposite direction. Randall says there's also a huge problem with the peer review system and the incentives involved for scientists who want to be published and funded. If you're interested in going deep on that, I recommend a book called The Delinquent Teenager by an Canadian investigative journalist by the name of Donna Laframboise. I also interviewed her in the 50-to-1 Project. You'll find that online as well. And she did a deep dive looking into the credibility of the IPCC itself and how intellectually and scientifically robust are their assessment reports. AR4, AR5, we hear these things. Oh, the IPCC has just released their latest assessment report. Well, how robust is that really? 2,000 scientists worked on this assessment report. Okay, but did they actually all agree with the hypothesis or did they not? And Donna Laframboise dives deep into that. And that's a book I'd highly recommend if you are interested in diving deep into all of the that stuff. Yeah, but Topher, 99% of scientists agree. Yes, this is the problem. This is like all these falsehoods. 97% is what they claim, and they've got two different ways of claiming 97%. One was a survey, deeply flawed methodology. They ended up taking their sample size from, I think it was 80-something responses to a survey that they sent out to over 12,000 scientists. The very fact that they narrowed their sample pool down so far tells you that there's something wrong with their methodology. Another one did, another claim of the 97% was of a meta-analysis of climate-related papers that were published, and they said 97% of all the published papers agree that the CO2 hypothesis is correct. And again, deep methodological issues with the keywords they searched for and how they actually, they judged them off their extracts, and someone went back and did a peer analysis on their conclusions and found a heap of papers that did not come to the conclusion that this so-called meta-analysis said they came to. So all of this stuff is just, there's just so much wrong with it. It's like, I could literally spend my entire life just diving deeper and deeper and deeper into all this stuff. And it's just a never-ending bottomless pit of corruption, perverse incentives, money chasing, grifting, all the rest of it. Okay. So I've outlined the economic situation only in very, very brief, but we are in uncharted territory. I can't predict what's going to happen. The experts can't predict what's going to happen. We've done stuff economically that nobody has ever done before in history. We've printed money since 2008 like nobody's business. I believe in the last 3 years, 80% of all US M1 money or M0 money, the most basic level of money supply, 80% of all US dollars came into existence in the last 3 years. So the M0 money supply in the US grew 5 times over in the last 3 years. No one's done that before. That's madness. We don't know what the consequences are. And we're heading into a grand solar minimum. It's going to get colder, not hotter. We're going to need more energy, and our energy grid isn't up to it. So it sounds like it's all doom and gloom, right? I came here to depress you all. Well, not quite. Not quite. Because the interesting thing is that we have this little thing called the internet. You may have heard of it. We're using it right now, and I'm talking to you. And I'm downloading a bunch of information that I have gathered over a period of time of reading a whole bunch of boring, crappy scientific papers and other stuff over time, which I was only able to read because of the internet. And we're able to communicate with each other and disseminate information in a way that was completely unthinkable only 30 years ago. And that gives me a great deal of hope, because we're able to talk to each other. We're able to communicate with each other. We're able to sit here and say, hey guys, this is what I'm seeing. Is this what you're seeing? Do you agree with me? Am I crazy? Am I completely off the deep end here? And as a result of being able to communicate with each other, we can start to respond and make decisions for ourselves and make choices about how we face the future. See, here's the thing. You and I actually cannot control whether or not there is going to be an economic meltdown. That is beyond your control. That is beyond my control. And you and I cannot control whether or not there is going to be a grand solar minimum, whether the temperature is going to go down or up, whether there's going to be more or less rain. We cannot control any of that. So there's no point trying. Right? There's no point trying. Don't try and control the things you can't control. You're going to waste your life. You're going to waste your energy. This is my concern with people who go deep down the conspiracy theory rabbit hole. They're researching all this stuff they can't verify, and even if they could, they couldn't control it. So why are you spending your life on it? Let's focus on the stuff that we can actually control. So what can you control in all of this? I'd actually, let's open this up to some more suggestions and questions and everything else, because ultimately, I'm only one person. I'm only one brain ticking away, working on this. You've all got brains. What are some of the things that you can control? What are some of the adaptations that you could make, that you look at your life and you go, you know what? If this is where we're headed, if we're headed for a time of economic chaos, if we're headed for a time where the value of money is going to be fluctuating and doing all sorts of stupid stuff, if we're heading for a time where it's going to get colder, we're going to need more energy, we're going to need better insulation, we're going to need better heating in the house, etc. If all of that's coming down the pipeline, how do we adapt? What do you do? Yeah. So Benjamin is spot on. So control what you can control, which is why self-reliance, independence from government and commercial services is more important than ever. Good. Okay. Grow your own food. Oops. Grow your own food. Start living within your means. Become more self-sufficient. Non-compliance. Put another jumper on. Oops. Someone said our health is wealth. Growing food, bartering, community support, chooks, wood fire, tank water, insulate the house. Okay, here we go. Good. Local community self-sufficiency. Okay. This right here is actually the key, in my opinion. Most people, when they think about self-sufficiency, think about it in terms of individualism or as a household, right? They think about, I'm going to supply everything that my family needs. That's freaking hard. Like that, you will be working day and night to eke out a subsistence living if you are trying to do everything yourself. All right. I grow my own food, but the nutrient runoff made the nearby trees go off. So now I have bugger all straight sun. Not quite following that one, but okay. So store up food. Yes, that can insulate you. That can buffer you. But in the end, you do need like ongoing food supply. Install a wood heater if you don't already have one. Buy silver coins to trade with. Invest in our own future. Buy the tools you need to make life better and to be more self-sufficient. building relationships with your neighbors so that you can exchange your excess. This, again, is the key. It's vital in tough times. That's how our grandparents survived rationing in World War II. 100%. 100%. Okay, so Stormy says, local community self-sufficiency is like a dream. Most people don't talk to their neighbors. Okay, so be the change that you want to see in the world. Start building those communities, start building those bridges, or move to somewhere where it's more possible to do it if you think it's not possible where you are. Okay, so let me get to my point. Community is right, yes. It's a community effort. Sorry, there was someone said community is right. Yeah, exactly. Community is right. Okay. It's a little thing called the division of labor, right? And I'm going to get all economic-y theory on you here, but it matters. Economic theory is like, the laws of economics are like the laws of physics. They apply. They apply in the apocalypse. They apply in good times. They apply on an island. They apply on a continent. They apply absolutely everywhere. Now we know. Okay, let me take a big step back. I promise you it will be relevant, but let me take a big step back. A very simple statement. If, on average, human beings create more than what they consume on a day-by-day basis, the human race becomes wealthier. Our standard of living improves, right? This can be very, very clearly illustrated. At one time, the Earth had a population of about 100 million people at one time, and the vast majority of those people were living in subsistence-type circumstances. They were working 7 days a week, trying to get some produce out of the land, living subsistence lifestyles, having to have their clothing last them for years, struggling to get by. Anytime there was bad weather, they would go hungry, right? That was the living standard of 100 million people. Now we have, approaching 8 billion people, and the average living standard is way better. How is that possible? We've got 80 times as many people. Surely, if wealth is finite, as some people believe it is, Malthusians especially believe that wealth is sort of this finite thing, then if there's 80 times more people, wouldn't we be 80 times less wealthy? Wouldn't the amount of wealth be divided up, amongst the greater number of people and we'd all be poorer? Well, no, we're not. And that's because human beings are capable of creating. We're capable of producing. And so quite simply, if we on average produce more than we consume as a species, then we get into a better and better place as time goes by. And that's what has made the incredibly easy living standards of me and my generation. Anyone in the Western world who's younger than about 50 years old won the freaking lottery, right? When you were born here in this era, we won the lottery. Why? Because we're standing on the shoulders of the generations that went before us, all of which created more than they consumed and left to us a legacy, whether it's the infrastructure that we have around us, whether it's the systems that we have, whether it's the technology, the knowledge, etc. They left that to us, and we could then start at where they left off and move on from there. And that's why we are so incredibly wealthy today. The ability of, or the willingness of people to produce more than they consumed. But how? How do you produce more than you consume? Well, there's numerous things that go into it. Energy is one of them, especially in the post-industrialization era where productivity per person has gone through the roof and our living standard has gone with it. The ability to run a machine, the ability to have a car that transports things instead of horse and cart, the ability to have a plow that's on a tractor and can do an area 20 meters wide all at once instead of pulling a single plow behind an ox. All of these things, energy is a huge part of it, but I'm going to put that aside for a moment. And I'm going to focus on another equally huge aspect of productivity and the reason why we're able to produce more than we consume. Matthew Gunn says, I've run out of wine. You must not be familiar with slow chats, mate. We go long in a slow chat. The division of labor. The division of labor. It's one of the most boring ass things to talk about in economics, but it is so incredibly important. And this is where community comes in, not trying to survive on your own or as a single household, but actually building and being a part of a community. If you had to provide everything for your life and for your household, if you as a household had to provide everything for yourself, number one, you would not have nearly as much as you do. and you would be working flat out on a subsistence existence. Think about it. If you had to provide the timber that is in the walls of your house, you had to go out there and cut it down, slice it up into logs and dry it out, etc. If you had to provide the fiber that's in your clothing, if you had to generate the electricity that's in your light bulbs, if you had to generate the silicon and everything else that's in your computer or your phone or your TV, whatever you're watching on, it'd be impossible, right? And yet it is possible somehow in the modern world for us to have all of those things. How is that possible? Well, it's because one person goes out there and gets really good at collecting timber and sells it. And someone else gets really good at growing fiber and sells it. And someone else gets really good at building electronics. Someone else is a really good baker. Someone else is good at this and good at that. By the division of labor, the specialization, we're able to be far more productive, and we're actually able to do far better quality work. Now, again, this is obvious. I'm not pretending this is some epiphany, some revelation for everybody. But think about it in the context of facing the world that is coming. And if you take the mindset of, I'm going to provide everything for myself and my family on our own, you're choosing a pathway that is very hard, and you're choosing a pathway that leads to a poverty lifestyle. If you go out there and build community where there's enough of you that each of you can actually be focused on the thing that you're good at. So that's funny. He says, I can sew, but that's about it. Well, you know what? If you had to do everything for yourself and your only real skill is sewing, you're screwed. But if you're in a bigger community and you are the best, sewer in that community, or not even necessarily the best, but it's a big enough community that there's room for 2 or 3 people who are making garments and repairing garments, you can thrive. You can do really, really well on that one skill thanks to the division of labor. But the division of labor requires a critical mass of people, and that's where community comes in. Now, I've talked about community before, but this is actually where, this is the first time I'm really just going, guys, community is the answer. Building community, finding each other, finding other people that even if they don't agree with you on everything, they're at least of the same mindset in terms of approaching the future and what we're facing in the future. I'm assuming this is intended to be satire. David Lynn says, oh, Topher, just buy a robot per task, then problem solved. Yes, until you have to repair one of the robots and you need that little rubber gasket and you don't have any way of making rubber. Look, technology is wonderful. Technology, energy, the ability to produce energy and then the ability to put that energy to work on our behalf is a fantastic thing. I'm really grateful to have a washing machine and to not be washing my clothes on a washboard in a river. I'm really grateful for that. But the reality is, if my washing machine broke, I wouldn't be able to fix it. I'd need someone else that has the necessary skills to be able to fabricate a part or to be able to repair that. So Joe says, what if you're not really good at anything? Well, what's the obvious solution to that? Get good at something. Upskill yourself. It comes back to what I said early on. I don't know if you were with us early on, Joe, but I was talking about the fact that it's the people with something to trade, right? Every time we do a transaction, we pay money, we get something in return, or we do something for someone or give something to someone and we get money in return, right? The money's not actually the significant side of that transaction. It's the thing that actually is transacted on the other side of the transaction. It might be someone's skills, it might be someone's knowledge, it might be a product, it might be a service, but it's the other side of that transaction that actually matters. And if you're saying, well, what if I don't have any skills? What you're saying is you don't have anything to trade on the other side of that transaction. And I would suggest that that's a bit of a warning bell to say, okay, what's something you can learn? What's something that you could actually do that would be a valuable skill for you to offer in a scenario where you're just getting along with your neighbors and you're bartering with your neighbors? Sodit says, lol, sounds like me, not good at anything, worked in finance for 23 years, no transferable skills. I did say earlier in this thread that the people who spent their life working in finance are the ones that are going to find themselves in trouble. So just saying, I called it. There is always something. All right. There is always something that you can do. Now, worst case scenario, you end up just being a laborer. You end up being a cleaner. You end up being, could I become a gigolo? Hey, if you can find people to pay for it, that's the key. The communities that recover the best after any sort of a disaster, a fire, flood, etc., are those that are the most connected. So this is my big overriding message. Okay, there are economic hard times coming. Okay. You've got to be pretty naive, in my personal opinion, to think otherwise. Given where we're at, given what we've done, given the setup that we've created over the last 40 years of foolishness, or really since, what was it, 1913, the Jekyll Island of nonsense, we've created a house of cards that is going to hurt us. And I think we are in the decade where the chickens are coming home to roost. All of the foolishness of the last century, and especially the last 40 years, and especially the last 4 years, is really going to come back and hurt us. I think this is the decade when that happens. So do something while you can, right? There are people laughing at me, and we saw them earlier in the comments saying, "Oh, you're detached from reality." Okay, maybe I am. I can accept the possibility that I'm wrong. Okay, but I'm just looking at the world and going, "This is what I see." But it's not obvious to everyone yet. And that means there's still a bit of time to maneuver, to upskill yourself, to get yourself to the point where you do have something in your life, a skill set, some property that you own, some machinery that you own, something that can provide value to the world. Even in a situation like Argentina, where they've got inflation running at 50% to 500% per annum. Even potentially a place like Venezuela, where they've got inflation running as high as 10,000% per annum. In a situation like Zimbabwe, where their currency completely collapsed. Do you have something that you can offer to other people? Because remember, if we are each creating more value than we're consuming, then we get wealthier. And that's still possible in an economic collapse. Remember, it's not the money side of the transaction that matters. It's the other side. It's the value that's being provided back and forth that actually matters. What if you could have a community where everyone's working hard and everyone has skills, and through the division of labor and the efficiency that comes with a community, you're able to continue to create more value on average as a community than what each of you is consuming? There's no reason why you as a community can't actually become wealthier even during an economic collapse, because it's not about the money. It's about what's offered on the other side of the transaction. Okay, see, this is a great little example. All right, I'm going to buy an overlocker. Very few people know how to use those. Okay, fantastic. That's something that has real world practical value. It's not a massively expensive investment. And I'm going to put a disclaimer in just a minute, but let me finish this point. It's not a massively expensive investment. It's something that's useful in the here and now, regardless of what happens economically. Even if I turn out to be wrong, it's still a useful thing to have. And it's a skill that would be very, very valuable in such a situation like what I think is coming our way. But let me say this. Let me be clear about what I do not advocate. What I do not advocate is making decisions that hurt you in the here and now. I've seen people run off and they buy the 100 acres out in the middle of nowhere, and they go and move a shipping container onto the block of land, and they go and live like a hermit with 10,000 rounds of ammunition. And I just shake my head. Because what they're doing is basically betting the house, betting their life, betting at least the next decade of their life on there being an apocalypse, like a proper full-on, zombie level apocalypse. And I just look at it and I go, you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. Put yourself in a situation where you're able to produce your own power. Let's just start there. Instead of spending all the money on some hideaway in the middle of nowhere where you're imagining you're going to be some last holdout against some imagined horde of people coming for your tins of baked beans, right? Instead of going there, let's put our energy and our effort into something that helps us now and is helpful in the event that I am correct, because I might not be, right? So put your money and put your time and put your energy into learning skills that are that are useful in all contexts. And there's lots of them. Being a better cook. That's a good skill to have, regardless of whether the zombie apocalypse comes along or not. Knowing how to grow food, knowing how to hunt, knowing how to fix things, knowing how to build things. These are useful skills to have, things to invest in yourself, regardless of what happens in the future. And that's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about some zombie apocalypse survival plan, throw your life away and go and drop off the grid and disappear and have no interaction with society. Like, no, leave that to the TV shows, the TV show preppers, all right? That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about building community And I'm talking about making smart choices so that you will have something to offer no matter what the future holds, to make sure that regardless of what's happening with the money side of the transaction, you can offer value. You can bring value to people on the other side of that transaction. Because if you can do that, then you'll have people, they might not have any money, but they'll come along and say, hey, my skill is I know how to hunt. I've got a half a deer in the freezer. I'll give you a week's worth of meat if you'll do this thing for me. You can barter if you have something practical to offer. If you don't, life gets more complicated for you. I agree, Jay. Living off grid is not hiding. I'm not saying that it is, but we all know, we either know the people or we know of the people, or we know the stereotype of the people who are just like, I'm just effing off out of here. And they've basically just said, sort of life for them is over. They don't have community. They don't have fellowship with other people. They're just heading out there to do their thing all by themselves. And good for them. You know what? Good for them. Nursing skills. Tremendously valuable, unfortunately very undervalued if you haven't taken the jabs. Very undervalued at the moment, but very, very valuable skills. If there was an actual apocalypse, if a Carrington event came along, a massive coronal mass ejection from the sun, took out the grid, and all of a sudden the grid was down and that was it. Technology's done, at least for 10, 20, 30 years while we rebuild everything and rediscover how to do everything. More people will die of medical complications and starvation than will die of any other cause. Infections, untreated injuries, all that sort of stuff, right? Yeah, but knowing how to grow food, knowing nursing skills, medical skills, that sort of stuff is incredibly, incredibly valuable. Benjamin, thank you for joining. Appreciate it. Nice to have you here. I appreciated your comments. Nursing is depression proof. Yeah. Community off grid. Yeah. Now, what does community have to look like? This is kind of my final point, and then I'll answer a few more questions and have a bit more of a chat, and then call it a day and go to bed. What does community look like? It doesn't have to be geographic necessarily, but it helps to be in sort of physical proximity with each other, where you could reach each other without too much difficulty if you needed to. Being in within an hour's walking distance would be kind of ideal to have a community of, what if you could have 5, 10, 20 other households, families within a 5-kilometer radius? You might live in the city. If you live in the country, a 5-kilometer radius might all still be your property. If you live in a station in Northern Territory. But what if you could have a community where there were a number of other people that you knew and they knew you, and they were within kind of touching distance, and you were just in each other's lives. You're just talking to each other. You're all growing a bit of food. You got hens. You're working on skills. Some of you are hunting. Some of you are growing. Some of you are fixing and repairing, and some of you are building. And that's just a normal part of life now. What if that was just part of life? Then if a big economic hiccup did happen, or if there was a reduction in the global food supply, and this is coming back to the question that was asked that I said I'd come back to about grains and proteins and so forth in Australia. The world getting colder is not actually going to hurt Australia's food supply terribly, but it is going to be very harmful to other parts of the world. There are other parts of the world that are currently producing very good amounts of food that are going to struggle. They're going to become very marginal if the global average temperature drops by 1 degree or 2 degrees. And so the global food supply is likely to suffer. The local food supply here in Australia, not so much. And so you could find yourself in a situation where if you're a primary producer, you can actually get really good value for your crop. I'm not saying that will happen, but if the grand solar minimum is coming, and if the global temperatures are going to drop by 1 degree to 2 degrees for the next 30 plus years, who knows how long, and you're a primary producer, you could find yourself in a situation where the global value of your produce is actually better than it's ever been. Thank you, Megan, and thank you again for all your support while I was in Tassie. I appreciate it. Then in Australia, the southeast of Australia, I think is a good place to be. And I'm not saying the rest of Australia isn't. I just don't know. I have data on the southeast of Australia. I've gone through it. The southeast of Australia is a pretty good place to be in a grand solar minimum, in my personal opinion. And so if we can just form those networks, it doesn't have to be your next door neighbor. Stop thinking about, oh, but the person across the road doesn't like me, the person next door never talks to me, etc. It doesn't have to be. What about someone a kilometer away? What about building a community of people that you know in your larger area? Each of you just with this same mindset, just going, you know what, I'm going to invest in myself. I'm going to upskill myself. I'm going to learn things and understand things. I'm going to learn how to repair some things, fix some things, sewing, electronics, building, whatever it may be. I'm going to learn to grow some things. And yeah, okay, maybe your focus is not trying to get, completely self-sufficient and have a backyard garden that provides you with all of your veggies, but you know how to grow stuff. And if the shit really hits the fan, you can then ramp that up. That's what I'm talking about. Building community where you are in the situation that you're in and getting to the point where you are useful. In a future world, hypothetically, where money has become worthless, your savings aren't worth anything, your superannuation isn't worth anything, you are useful. And if you can put yourself in that situation and you can network in with other families or individuals that are taking the same approach, then you are future-proofed to a degree that other people around you are not. And if the shit really does hit the fan, then you can actually walk into that with some confidence and with some hope and with a plan where other people are going to be panicking. Yeah. If you're attending Stand in the Park events, and if you're not, I'd encourage you to find your local Stand in the Park event and start attending. But yes, that's a great place to start talking about this stuff. It's a great place to be going, okay, if this is the world we're headed for, greater levels of economic uncertainty, I think that's fairly self-evident, and quite likely a cooler and wetter overall climate where there's higher energy demands and a less reliable energy grid. If that's the future we're heading into, let's talk to each other. The people who are still showing up to Stand in the Park events are probably good people to be talking to about this stuff. Community groups like sporting clubs is a bit more hit and miss. You'll find very, very different people there that are in very different places and very different mindsets. But if you can find some people, absolutely. Danny, I assume that's satire. Well, yeah, with the laughy faces, that is. No worries. The Labor government will look after us all. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you go right ahead and believe that, buddy. I know you don't. Yeah. So I went, actually, I didn't look up when this slow chat was. It would have been a good idea. I would have given you the date for this one as well. I went into quite a lot more detail on some really nitty gritty practical stuff and the things you need to look at in terms of giving yourself some resilience in the event of a grid down type scenario, or, hypothetically, the example that I used was the winter storms that happened in Texas, I think about 3 years ago now, where large amounts of Texas, the entire Texas grid went down, and most of Texas was without power for between 3 and 7 days. And within 2 days, people were on having to go out in this awful winter storm. And Texans are not used to like full on winter storms, looking for water because their pipes had frozen, looking for food because they didn't have, they had 2 days worth of food in the cupboard. That was it. They were out. Or, the gas stopped flowing so they couldn't cook, etc. And officially about 150 or 170 odd people died as a result of that winter storm. But actually the excess mortality in Texas over that week was in excess of 700 people. 700 additional people died because of a severe winter storm in Texas and people not being prepared. A significant proportion of those people died out of their house, froze to death in their cars, or died in car crashes or various other things like that, because they just didn't have at home what they actually needed, what they actually, the basics. And yes, people will do extreme things for their kids, and you can't really blame them. But that's worth thinking about. I am 100% on board with Brexit. If we could make that happen, that would be amazing. During that Texas storm, that winter storm, people were making fires in their own houses. Some of the people that died of CO2 poisoning. Carbon monoxide, not CO2, carbon monoxide poisoning, because they were using outdoor heaters inside the house, or they dragged the barbecue into the house and turned the gas on and lit it in order to try and get some warmth. They were that cold, and then they died of carbon monoxide poisoning. Topher the prepper. I'm trying to consume less food, Linda. I'm trying. I really am. Thank you for being here, Travis. Thanks for tonight, Topher. This is building community in itself. I hope so. And look, one of the things that I've thought about is, do I try and formalize something? Because obviously there's 60 odd thousand people on my Facebook page, and there's another sort of 30 odd thousand people on my email list and other stuff like that. And, I think amongst those tens of thousands of people are the people that we're looking for. The community that we're looking for is probably inside my emailing list, if only I sort of, I guess, formalized it and tried to figure out a way to make it happen. But I don't even really know what that would look like. So if anyone's got any ideas on how that could even be made to kind of work and to happen, send me an email. Topher@topherfield.net is my email. Send me your ideas, because I'm sitting here going, I think the community that I'm encouraging people to build is kind of there. I just don't kind of know what to do with it. So if you've got some ideas on that, do let me know, because I'm very, very open to suggestions on how, look at all the people in the comments here. So many people, there's 423 people still watching right now after 2 hours. How many of you are the community that each of you are looking for? Probably quite a lot. I just don't know how to formalize that and how to kind of make that happen. So Hoodie is doing some great work in that regard, Carolyn. You're absolutely right. Caroline, sorry. Hoodie, making local communities on Hoodie's Heroes. Absolutely. And he's doing really, really good work. Yes, it is. Topher is the shortening of Christopher. Look at the last half of Christopher. There's my name. All right. Yeah. Groups like Tassie Aware, etc. Like, there are groups popping up. Absolutely. But I don't know. I just feel like there's something here. I've got something here. I've been doing this for 12 years. Amazing people have come along to support me. Some people have been following me since the very beginning. Some people have just sort of found me. But I'm sure that there's some. I'm sure I could be doing more. I don't know. I could be doing more. Answer questions and stop smoking cigars like you're the boss. This is my life. This is my life. I am the boss. Freedom Cells Network. Okay, Freedom Cells Network. Haven't heard of them. I can't vouch for them, but there's another lead if you're looking. Okay, so people are making suggestions of people they're aware of that are sort of building communities, etc. Which is good. Thank you, Wen. I appreciate that. John, that's entirely possible, but I'm not convinced that the data shows that. It's possible, but I'm not convinced that the data shows that will happen. The data shows that there will be a grand solar minimum. That's non-controversial. How deep it will be, I don't think we know. Should we be preparing for the worst? That's up to each individual to decide. Active group in Lara. All right. So guys, that was kind of my focus tonight. I wanted to say, look, and reiterate what I said 14 months ago and say everything that's happened in the 14 months since I came out and said that still lines up with it. Nothing that I said in that slow chat on the 8th of April, 2021, you can find it on my Facebook page. Nothing that I said in that has been invalidated in the 14 months since. And everything that's happened since has been consistent with my theory that we're headed towards tough economic times and a colder world, probably for the rest of my lifetime, right? It will probably, the grand solar minimum will probably outlive me. That's the likely reality here. And so we have to think about what's happening, and we have to think about how we respond to that. And I just want to really encourage you to think about how you respond to that in the context of building community, not in the context of some fear-based withdrawal from society, but a clear-eyed, clear-minded, intentional building of community and upskilling of yourself to make sure that you are useful in the future world, whatever that may look like. Now, there is one last thing. I want to ask for your help, and this is a complete tangent from everything that I've talked about in the last sort of 2 hours and 10 minutes, and that is I just released the Battleground Melbourne DVD. And every time I post on Facebook about it, it gets squashed. I can't get the word out about it at all. So if you're one of the people that said you wanted a DVD, I'd be very, very grateful if you jump in and grab one. I've had to invest about $6,000 on all the graphic design, the mastering of the DVD in the first place, and a minimum run of 500 copies. I need to sell about 300 copies just to kind of break even and recoup that after I pay royalties to some people for music and other things like that. I don't get all the money out of the DVDs. I've got to pay other people out of them as well. So I've got to sell about 300. I just released them yesterday. I've sold about 100 so far. So if a Battleground Melbourne DVD is something that you would like, please go to battlegroundmelbourne.com. Actually, I will type it in. Battlegroundmelbourne.com. Melbourne.com. Oops, not with a comma. .com. Bill says, how much per copy? It's $24 for the DVD. And Craig says, will it be on Blu-ray? I wanted it to be on Blu-ray, but I had very limited expressions of interest. So I ended up having to can that because that would have cost me about another $3,000. And then I would have had to have bought another 500 minimum, which is another $4,000 on top. So it would have been another $7,000 outlay. And there just wasn't enough interest in the Blu-rays. People are asking what's a DVD, who needs physical media, etc. Look, people were asking for it. I did it in response to people asking for it. So I'm hoping that I'm going to move the 300 copies that I need to move to break even. But if you're one of the people that was thinking you wanted to have a copy on your shelf or have a copy to take to a friend's place and have a movie night with them and sit down and go, listen, you've got to watch this. Then if you could go to battlegroundmelbourne.com and grab a copy, that would be appreciated. I'd love to cover my costs on that as soon as possible. So that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you very much. I actually don't mind it. I don't mind Battleground Melbourne being pirated. Like it's free to watch. Let me be clear. You can go to battlegroundmelbourne.com and you can watch it for free. Right? It was crowdfunded. You guys paid for it. And it's always going to be available to watch for free online. Please don't feel like you have to buy a DVD if you want to watch it. That's not the point here. But there are lots of people like Neil who want to have something on the shelf. I'm an analog guy. I still have videotapes. My father-in-law is the same. He's got videotapes down at his holiday house, and he sits and he watches them and he enjoys them. Other people are like Lisa. I don't even have a DVD player, and fair enough. But people ask for the DVD. I've made the investment, we'd be very grateful for those of you that want to grab a copy. Please just go and do that. That would be appreciated. It would be nice to know that I've covered the costs of that investment. So battlegroundmelbourne.com. And then you'll find the link there. It'll take you to another website. It's called AussieBot. It's a great guy in Horsham in Victoria who looks after all of my fulfillment and blah, blah, blah. He'll go just use his website. It's all good. And he'll post it all out to you. So I would go further than to say that it's a great way to go. I know you said the best. Yes, I think it is the best way to go. Sorry, I misread your comment. I think it is the best way to go. I don't think there really is any other way. I think it's the only way to go. Yes, the hoodies are warm. The hoodies, they're really, really good. They're double stitched. They're really good quality. I'm really, really happy with them. They are. They're good quality. So if you're cold, grab a hoodie. Yeah, I hear you. That's funny. I'm really worried about these guys as well. All that, the hundreds of people employed in Daniel Andrews' social media team. Like, it'll be so sad when they lose their jobs. All right. I'm winding down now, guys. If you've got other things to do, you need to go to bed, feel free. But I'm just going to go through and answer a few more comments. This is a CBR 1100 XX. It's known as the Blackbird. Was the fastest motorbike in the world when it was released. This one hasn't moved under its own power for about 8 years, unfortunately, which is a shame. But it's just the realities of sort of marriage and being a dad, etc. I just haven't been able to justify the cost to register it, unfortunately. Melissa, thank you very much for buying a copy. I appreciate that. The whole solar minimum thing was just a tactic to sell more hoodies. You're onto me. You're onto me. Yes, I would have loved to have taken that last spot off the Jackie Lambie network, but it was not to be. And it is what it is. The people have made their vote, they've made their decision, and Jackie Lambie got that spot. David, I would love to, but honestly, I've got so much going on in my life, I haven't even looked into them. I'm not gonna speculate on stuff that I actually haven't laid eyes on myself. I'm not just going to repeat stuff that other people have said. I want to read stuff myself, and I haven't had the chance yet. So, sorry, can't comment there. That'll be a good day. Am I bum puffing? With cigars, you don't inhale. If you inhale a cigar, trust me, you won't do it twice. Yeah, you won't do it twice. Do you think Andrews will win in November? This is one of those things that it depends on the week you ask me. I feel different about this each time I have to answer this question. It's going to be interesting, and I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that he doesn't. And one of the things I'm wanting to do, and I'm planning on at the moment, depending on the level of interest from the public, is to actually take Battleground Melbourne around to cinemas around Victoria and to a few different cinemas around Melbourne, to try and get more people to watch it. Because if people are already forgetting, this blows my mind. People are forgetting what was done in 2020 and 2021. It's already going down the memory hole. It's just astonishing to me, and we need to make sure that it's front of mind when people walk into that polling booth on November 26th. So yeah, we need to take him down. We have to take him down. In my opinion, I think Battleground Melbourne is the best weapon to do that. And so I'm going to be really, really pushing to try and get more people to watch it. Watch it for free online. You don't have to buy the DVD. I'd be grateful if you did, but watch it for free. Send the link to your friends. Grab a DVD, have a movie night at someone else's house. Drag them along to the cinema if I come to a cinema that's within driving distance of you between now and November. More about that in coming months as the plans sort of evolve. But I think Battleground Melbourne is one of the best weapons we have to try and actually get people to hold him account. Send me an email at Topher@topherfield.net, Topher@topherfield.net. Tell me whereabouts you are and when your birthday is, and we'll see if we can have a showing in your area on a weekend before or after your birthday. With the plans are still very much in their infancy, so we can potentially have a bit of fun, do a few things like that. It's sad how quickly things are forgotten. People have moved on. And it's unfortunate. It's a little depressing sometimes. You know what? That's funny. As much as I'd like that, nothing should be mandatory. Not even watching Battleground Melbourne should be mandatory. Nothing should be mandatory. Lots of good comments coming through. I'm having trouble even keeping up with them as they come through. But well, the best thing we can do is get people to watch Battleground Melbourne and actually see it for themselves. They're not going to go back and watch Rukshan's coverage, unfortunately, as much as it would be great if they did. They're not going to, but they might watch Battleground Melbourne. This is the interesting thing. So Victorians are dumb. I'm not going to argue with that. They just voted for Labor in droves in the federal election. Yes, but if you actually drill down into the data, there's reason for concern from Daniel Andrews' point of view. His electorate didn't do very well. And I think that there is some concern in the Victorian Labor Party about what's coming at the November election. And I can't control the outcome, but I definitely want to fuel their fear, the Victorian Labor Party's fear between now and November, and maximize the possibility of an internal coup within the party, getting rid of Daniel Andrews, or some division, some infighting, etc. And we do that by ramping up the pressure. We do that by things like getting Battleground Melbourne out there, send the link to people, get them to watch it. I agree. I do think they're worried. I can't predict the outcome. I don't know. But I do think they're worried. Marie, you can put on a showing without even buying a DVD. Like I said, I'd be grateful if you did, but it's free to watch at battlegroundmelbourne.com. It's in 4K on battlegroundmelbourne.com. And you can watch it there. You can have a showing from there. But if you want a DVD, or if you just want to support me, then I'd be really grateful if you'd grab one. That would be appreciated. Swan Pool. To be honest, I don't even know where that is. But if there is a cinema, because it's made to proper cinema spec. It has proper audio. It has proper quality. I've got what's called a DCP, which is what cinemas need in order to show it. They can't just show a file off a computer. We've done it all the right way. And so I'd love to be showing it in cinemas. So if they have a small cinema, then absolutely. Absolutely. Let's make them afraid. I agree, Karen. Thank you, Aidan. That would be appreciated. Battlegroundmelbourne.com is where you can go to do that. That's near Benalla. I assume that's in response to the earlier comment about Swan Pool. Well, I mean, Benalla is definitely a big enough place to be able to do a showing there. Thank you, Fabian, for your support. It was very, very good for us from a morale point of view to know that other states were in our corner and we're chanting on our behalf. It was good. One thangy, if there's a cinema, absolutely. I've got a lot of time for Michael, and this is a good point. Thank you, Deborah. Michael Gray Griffith had a good point. We need to stop trying to wake people up. When they see the communities we are forming with love and their lives are falling apart under the government, they'll choose the thriving communities. I think that's a great point. If you play 4 DVDs at the same time, you make it. Look, it pains me not to do a Blu-ray. I would have loved to have done a Blu-ray. But when I put the word out and I sent an email out to my database and had about 250 people come back and say what they wanted, only 20 of them wanted a Blu-ray. And given the cost, so that's given the cost, I just couldn't justify doing the Blu-ray as well as a DVD. So thank you, Stephen. That's the URL there, battlegroundmelbourne.com. And if you could head over there, grab a DVD. There's also posters and T-shirts and hoodies. And what they've got is they've actually got the QR code on the front. Don't shoot me. I know QR codes. I know they're on the nose. But you know what? The government made us all learn about QR codes, so we might as well use them against them. There's a QR code on the shirt and on the hoodie, and all someone has to do is scan that QR code, and it takes them straight to battlegroundmelbourne.com. And Battleground Melbourne is embedded in that page. They can watch it right then and there. So if you walk around wearing that hoodie or wearing that shirt, you can strike up conversations with people, and you've got the URL right there on the shirt, along with the awards that we've won, and obviously the Battleground Melbourne branding as well. So I think you're right, John. I think things have to get a little bit worse before, well, maybe a lot worse, before people are really going to start paying attention. All right. Well, yeah, unfortunately, most people don't. I do. I would love to have it on Blu-ray, but yeah, a lot of people don't see the difference. All right. Yeah, I know, QR codes, I know, but they made us use them. We might as well use them against them. Thank you, Susie. I appreciate that. She says, I'm going to wear my hoodie everywhere. I appreciate that. That's needed. We need people. There's posters as well if you want to put it up in your workplace or in your home or something, just as conversation starters, just to have people go, oh, what's that? And then you can school them. You can educate them. Yep, there are people from VicPol that do watch. None with malicious purposes, as far as I know. There's actually quite a lot of VicPol members that their conscience is bothering them, and they know that VicPol was in the wrong, and they do actually watch my stuff. So, thanks for watching, guys and girls. You have my permission to download the documentary and do whatever you want with it. I'm not trying to make money off this. So if you can get it into more people's hands, if you have a way, you want to put it on the Pirate Bay, you want to put it wherever, you have my permission to do that, right? This documentary belongs to the people of Victoria, and my number one priority is to get as many people as possible to watch it. So that's actually a good idea. Download it in 4K. It's battlegroundmelbourne.com. It's in 4K right there. Download it. Do whatever you need to do with it. Just get it out there. Get more people to see it. All right. Well, thank you all very much for watching. I really appreciate everything. And, I appreciate all the comments. There's still over 350 people watching right now. I'm very grateful to you. If you're not on my email list, please go to topherfield.net. The email sign up is on the right-hand side of the page, or obviously if you're on a phone, it'll just be in the feed as you scroll down. Make sure you're on the email list, because I'm getting suppressed on YouTube. I'm getting suppressed on Facebook. I'm getting suppressed on Instagram. So please make sure you're on the email list, and that way, I can actually communicate with you without other people getting in the way. And yes, they're all the new versions. So for those that were there for the launch, the music was completely off. The music mix was completely wrong. I apologize for that. We've remastered it, re-released it, the DVD, and if the Blu-ray ever gets made, the Blu-ray as well, they're all in the finished version, the final version, where all of that was properly balanced. It was completely redone. And I also took the opportunity to make a couple of other tweaks and improvements, putting in writing on the screen, how many days in we were, because people sort of lost track of just how long it had gone on for. Did a few other things like that along the way. And the DVD is absolutely the official version. All right, thanks, guys. Really appreciate your company tonight. Build community. That's my message. Yeah, there's some ugly stuff happening in the world. We can't control whether or not that actually happens. All we can control is how we respond to it. And I think the best way to respond is to reach out, find like-minded people. Doesn't matter if they are your next door neighbor or not. Okay, stop thinking about it in those terms. Think about it in terms of finding people who are within a couple of kilometers of you, right? Within sort of striking distance, if you absolutely had to, and make those people a part of your life and upskill yourself so that you can be useful in the future world, whatever form that may take. Thanks, guys. I'll see you again for another slow chat next week, if not before. See ya.